Chapter 1. Zhu Yao felt that she had transmigrated, and it happened without any warning. Just a moment ago, she was still chatting with someone in front of the computer, discussing the loopholes in the company's newly developed MMORPG. In the next moment, she was already sitting in this straw hut, and her white mouse was still in her hand. She did not react for exactly 10 minutes. Looking at the mouse in her hand, she subconsciously looked for the computer screen and CPU that suddenly disappeared. However, she could only stare at the broken table in front of her. Where did the monitor and CPU come from? Mama's egg, she couldn't even find the keyboard. Stinky brat, what are you still standing there for? Someone pushed open the door and came in, raising her hand to hit her. She instinctively dodged, and the only mouse in her hand was sent flying as well, rolling away without a trace. Zhu Yao then raised her head to look at the person next to her. It was a very skinny woman, and the wrinkles on her head were very deep. Her dark-colored clothes were filled with grayish-white, as though the color of her legs had faded after being washed many times. Her entire body was emitting out an aura of "I'm a village woman." The main point was that she was wearing an ancient costume. "Who are you?" The woman was instantly enraged. "Who am I? Are you muddle-headed from sleep? I'm your mother. Hurry and boil some water. The sun is already shining on your butt. And you're still staying in the house? Do you want to get beaten up?" The woman's attack missed, and she then grabbed Zhu Yao, pulling her out of the door without any explanation. Zhu Yao felt that she had to explain herself, but unfortunately, she could not find the chance. When she regained her senses, she had already been thrown into the kitchen. Looking at the pile of firewood and the clay stove, Zhu Yao felt that there was definitely a problem with her transmigration method. She was clearly wearing her pajamas, and nothing had changed. This proved that she was wearing it with her body. Then how did that mother come out? She was clearly wearing it, yet she used a soul transmigration setting. Was this really alright? Most importantly, she did not even know how to light a fire. So how the hell was she going to boil water? Although she knew that transmigration was like buying cabbages, and was very popular, it would never happen to her, right? At most, she was just a technological geek. As she was interested in computers since she was young, ever since she graduated, she had been working as a game developer. Along with a bunch of single dogs, she mixed together and developed games. She created the popular online game Celestial Empire. As the game matured, her main job in the company became maintenance. She was looking for flaws in the game and fixing them. This was the legendary GM. For such a person to transmigrate, he wouldn't have any advantages at all, okay? Which bastard made her transmigrate? Come out. I promise I won't beat you to death. 3 months later, in the blink of an eye, it had already been 3 months since Zhu Yao transmigrated to this world, and she had a rough understanding of the surrounding situation. The place she was living in was indeed a small mountain village, and because most of the people in the village had the surname Zhu, it was called Zhu Village. Her own name was Zhu Yao as well, and the middle-aged woman she met that day was her mother. She was a widow in this village, and it was said that the mother and daughter had been relying on each other for more than 10 years. She once tried to explain her identity to this nominal mother, but unfortunately, her mother did not believe her. She was even forced to go to Dr. Wang at the entrance of the village, saying that he would help her with acupuncture. Then she saw the kind middle-aged doctor stroking his beard, while taking out a dozen silver needles, as thick as a thumb. Zhu Yao instantly forgot about her morals, as she hugged her cheap mother, and cried bitterly, "Mother, you're my biological mother. You're finally awake? Don't spout nonsense anymore." Her cheap mother wiped away Zhu Yao's tears with a pained look, and did not forget to praise Dr. Wang. "Dr. Wang is truly a genius doctor. My daughter recovered the moment your needles came out. You flatter me." Dr. Wang smiled complacently. He twirled the silver needles in his hands and said, "Lady Zhu, you're being too courteous. For safety's sake, let me give Yao or 2 more needles to prevent a relapse." "Relapse your sister." Anyways, the past was unbearable. From then on, Zhu Yao no longer dared to mention about her transmigration, and peacefully guarded the Zhu village as an old lady. That's right, she was an old lady. When she transmigrated, she was 28 years old. In this world, a 28-year-old lady who was still unmarried was an extremely old lady. As for the reason why she was not married, her cheap mother had never mentioned it to her, so she was happy to be at ease. She was really afraid that a husband would pop out one day. Then, even if Dr. Wang were to stab her with a wooden club, she would not do it. "Yawa, are you going to wash clothes?" Just when she was about to head to the riverside, she met Dr. Wang at the intersection. He was smiling at her like a sunflower, and it even smelled like chrysanthemum. Uncle Wang." Zhu Yao subconsciously took a step back, afraid that he would pull out a silver needle from somewhere. "Mother said that the sun is good today, so she asked me to wash the bedding." "Is that so?" Dr. Wang laughed and sighed. "You sure are a hard-working lady. If not because—" He paused halfway through his words, as though he had mentioned something he should not have mentioned, and looked at her a little apologetically. "Uncle Wang, is there something you need from me?" Seeing how he looked like he wanted to say something, Zhu Yao had no choice but to take the initiative to ask. Dr. Wang smiled apologetically and nudged the little boy next to him. "It's like this. I heard that a deity is choosing a disciple in the town today, and everyone can try. I thought of letting my little boy try his luck, but coincidentally, your aunt is sick again, and I can't leave, so." Only then did Zhu Yao see the little boy he was holding. He looked to be around 7 or 8 years old, and he looked very delicate and pretty. His tender little face was currently puffed up, and he was glaring at her with puffed cheeks, making people want to pinch him. Zhu Yao raised her head and looked at Dr. Wang. This breed was evidently not right. "Uncle Wang wants me to bring him?" Dr. Wang nodded and became even more embarrassed. "I know this might delay your matters, but this deity only comes to our town once every 10 years to choose disciples. Although the number of people chosen can be counted with one's fingers, it's still a chance. If you are chosen, you will become a deity." Become a deity? Zhu Yao had always been uninterested in such unscientific matters. She could faintly smell the scent of a fraud. However, after all, Dr. Wang was from the same village as her, and it was impossible for her to transmigrate back in such a short period of time. Since they would meet frequently, helping him with a small matter wasn't a problem. Hence, she agreed to it without any hesitation. Dr. Wang thanked her profusely, took the wooden basin from her hands, and expressed that he would help her send it back. Then, he shoved the evidently angry child into her hands. Then he left happily. When he walked far away, the little boy fiercely shook off her hand. Snorting coldly, he pouted his lips and looked at her with a disgusted look. "I'm telling you, even if you help me, I won't marry you." Zhu Yao was startled, and for a moment she found it a little funny. She could not help but pinch his tender little face. "You little wimp whose hair hasn't even grown out yet. What nonsense are you spouting?" "I'm not spouting nonsense." The boy dodged her hand and rubbed his aching cheeks. "I've heard from others that no one in the village dares to marry you. That's why you can't get married, even after 28 years. All men have to stay away from you, otherwise, their lives will be ruined if you cling on to them." No matter how desperate she was, she wouldn't lay her hands on a little wimp, right? "Speak clearly. How am I ruining someone's life?" Little wimp, however, grew even more confident. "You can't give birth to a child. If I were to marry you, my family line will end. Of course, it's ruining my life." Infertile? Zhu Yao was stunned by this shocking news. That was impossible. Although she was a technological geek, she still had a physical examination every year. How could she not know that she was infertile? Even if the heavens wanted to rationalize the transmigration of a 28-year-old unmarried young woman like her, there was no need to slander her like this, right? "I'm the only boy in my family. I won't marry you, just give up." Little wimp placed his hands on his hips, and once again emphasized with a stern look. My bad temper. As expected of a spoiled brat. If you don't get spanked for 3 days, you'll start tearing the roof tiles apart. You're asking for a spanking, aren't you?" With a roll of her sleeves, she picked up little wimp from the ground and gave him a good spanking on his buttocks. "This is what you get for not knowing your manners. This is what you get for spouting nonsense. This is what you get for saying that I'm infertile. You're the one who's infertile. Your entire family is infertile." Only then did little Wimp know fear, as he desperately struggled. However, as a 7 or 8-year-old child, how could he compare to a 28-year-old adult like Zhu Yao? After a few dozen hits, little Wimp's snow-white buttocks were already as red as a blooming flower. From the initial struggle, he began to cry, and in the end, he had already given up resisting. Scream all you want, scream all you want. In any case, Dr. Wang has long left. Even if you scream your lungs out, no one will come and save you. Wahahaha. Something doesn't seem right here. Half an incense's worth of time later, Zhu Yao finally let go of the boy whose face had already turned into a flower blotch from crying. She watched as he wiped his tears, and then pulled up his pants. The feeling of teaching a spoiled brat a lesson simply couldn't be any better. I'll let it go this time. If you're so impolite again, I'll... Zhu Yao dragged out her warning. Satisfied, she saw the spoiled brat's body tremble, and his chuckle became even more joyous. I'll make it so that you won't be able to get off the bed, understand? Forget about it. Let's go, we're going to town. Follow me. Chapter 2. She did not know if it was because of the so-called deity's disciple selection, but along the way, she met several people who were holding on to their children and rushing towards the town. All of them had excited expressions, and their discussions were all about the descent of the deity, the disciple selection, and other such matters. Zhu Yao silently admired the rallying power of this trickster, to actually make so many people believe in him without a doubt. Zhu village was actually not far from the market, and it only took them an hour to walk. They had already arrived at the entrance of the city. Because there were too many people entering the city, she had no choice but to hold on to little Wimp's hand, in case they got lost. However, little Wimp did not resist at this moment, and simply struggled a few times symbolically, before quietly allowing Zhu Yao to pull him forward. However, his little face was still stinky. After much difficulty, they finally arrived at the selection location, only to see that it was already packed with people. A tall stage was erected in the middle of the crowd, and 4 people stood on it. All of them were dressed in the same white robes, and the corners of their robes were embroidered with patterns that looked like auspicious clouds, giving them a very sage-like appearance. Unexpectedly, the 4 of them were all very young, and were much more pleasing to the eye than the white-bearded old man in Zhu Yao's imagination. Zhu Yao silently gave him a thumbs up in her heart. She did not expect that this trickster was actually quite professional. Just by looking at their uniform, she could tell that they were definitely organized and disciplined. Just based on this extravagance, it was no wonder they were able to scare so many people to come and watch. On the right side of the tall stage, there was a long line of people. Although there were both men and women in the crowd, every single adult was holding on to 1 or 2 children. Their ages ranged from those who had just learned how to walk, to those that were half the height of a human. However, most of them did not even look to be 10 years old. Zhu Yao guessed that this was most likely the registration line. Although she did not have much interest in such an obvious scamming activity, she had to complete Uncle Wang's instructions. In any case, she was not being scammed of her money. Hence, without any hesitation, she stood at the very back of the line. Little Wimp was obedient this time, as he obediently stood together with her. Earlier, he still had a stinky little face, but now, it was replaced with an expression of anticipation. Occasionally, he would stretch his neck and stare at the front of the line. After all, children are always curious about new things. A moment later, among the 4 people on the stage, a middle-aged man stood up and took a few steps forward. Clearing his throat, he said, "Everyone, today is the day that our ancient hill sect accepts disciples once every 10 years. There are no restrictions on gender, and no restrictions on background. Everyone, please step forward and be tested." This person sure was straightforward. Zhu Yao had thought that he would give a long speech to sway her, but she never expected that he would immediately begin with a single sentence. Zhu Yao could not help but feel a little curious as well. Just what kind of overbearing organization was this? "First place," the middle-aged man said. A woman at the front of the line walked forward with a child in each hand. A younger immortal in white on the stage waved his hand. A crystal ball suddenly appeared in the middle of the stage. The people on the stage exclaimed, The young man's expression did not change. He said coldly to the two children on the stage, "Put your hands on it." The two children took a step back in fear. In the end, it was the children's mother who pushed them from behind. "What are you afraid of? If you get chosen, you'll reach the heavens in a single step. Hurry, go up." Only then did the two children place their little hands on the floating ball. Unfortunately, there were no changes on the ball at all. The white-clothed middle-aged man shook his head and said, "No spirit veins." Next, the woman sighed, and a disappointed expression instantly appeared on her face. However, she did not argue, as she held onto her pair of children and walked down the stage. Zhu Yao, however, was a little confused. This scene, why did she feel that it was a little familiar? The hell, wasn't this the scene of choosing people that was commonly seen in cultivation novels? A scene that would appear at the beginning of every cultivation novel. Testing for spirit veins. She had always thought that she had transmigrated into a farmer's field, and in her entire life, she would only be able to live as a peasant woman with a little field in the mountains. Looking at the current situation, could it be that she was going to take the path of a Xianxia novel? But Zhu Yao looked at herself, and then looked at the row of little radishes in front of her. Did she transmigrate a little too hastily? Going to cultivate at the age of 28. Even if she crawled, she would not be able to crawl faster than this bunch of little radishes, right? For the first time ever since she transmigrated, Zhu Yao felt a deep sadness. Hey. Zhu Yao's hand sank. When she turned her head to look, she realized that little wimp was pulling her earlier. "What's the matter? Don't scratch a person who is in a beautiful and sad mood." Little wimp pointed to the tall stage in front of them and said, "Hurry, it's going to be our turn soon." Only then did Zhu Yao realize that there was already a huge empty space in front of her. She hurriedly brought little wimp to join the queue. The speed of testing for spirit veins was very fast, but unfortunately, most of the children did not have spirit veins. That middle-aged man was also repeating over and over again, "No spirit veins next." A large group of children went up, but there were only 3 or 4 children left on the stage, and all of them had tetra and pentaspirit veins. Looking at the expressions of the 4 people on the stage, she believed that they did not have very good spirit veins either. Next, he was simply too skinny and weak, as though he would collapse with a single blow. His clothes were even more tattered, and not a single piece of unblemished skin could be found. He did not have any adults accompanying him either. Evidently, he was a little beggar. The people below could not help but cover their noses, as though they were disgusted. However, the expressions of the 4 people on the stage did not change. It was as though they could not see the child's distressed look. They had cultivated for many years, and had never judged a person by his appearance. Today, he had fallen, but who knew if he would not soar into the skies tomorrow? The middle-aged man pointed to the round ball on the stage. "Place your hand on it." Although the child was dirty, he did not mind the gazes of others in the slightest. He walked straight to the center of the stage and placed his hand on it. The round ball that was still transparent earlier slowly emitted a ball of green light. When it was about to fill up the entire ball, another ray of golden light flashed, until the ball was completely filled up. Metal and wood duo spirit veins. The 3 youths sitting at the back suddenly stood up at the same time. Their indifferent expressions earlier instantly changed. They looked at the impoverished youth with a joyful expression. "I never thought that we would actually meet a disciple with duo spirit veins this year." The 4 of them nodded at the same time, and even their tone became extremely courteous. Duo spirit veins. This person would definitely be chosen to enter the inner sect. This little junior martial brother, please go to the side and rest. After today's test ends, you can follow us back to the sect. The little beggar nodded. His strange little face did not have the joyous expression of the 4 people, and simply obediently stood next to the few children who were left behind. That expression of his seemed as though he had long expected this to happen. Zhu Yao glanced at the calm-looking little beggar, and instantly had a strange feeling. She could not describe it, but she felt that something was amiss. Where next? The little wimp at the side was completely unaffected by Zhu Yao's emotions. Instead, he excitedly pulled her hand. "Next, it's our turn." Little Wimp pulled her and excitedly sprinted up the stage. He did not look nervous in the slightest and immediately pressed his hand on the round ball. Zhu Yao lowered her head to look at the little wimp at the side and then looked at the little beggar on the stage. She finally understood. It seemed like it was better to have fewer spirit veins. However, duo spirit veins were already so incredible. She wondered what would happen with a single spirit veins. Just as she was thinking that, she suddenly heard a commotion in the surroundings. Even the 4 white-robed deities who were standing far away earlier surrounded her and looked at her with a face of disbelief. The little wimp at her side. Heavenly spirit veins. The middle-aged man could actually not even speak properly. He snatched the child from her hands and was about to carry him. He actually has a heavenly spirit veins of the fire attribute. Hey, what are you doing? Zhu Yao became anxious and no longer cared if he was a real deity or a fake one. It would be terrible if he snatched the child away. If she were to throw this little wimp away, Dr. Wang would definitely stab her to death. She fiercely snatched the little wimp back. Human trafficker, stay away from me. Little Wimp was a little frightened as well, as he immediately dove into her embrace to hide. Only then did the 4 people regain their senses. Looking at Zhu Yao's protective look, the middle-aged man coughed and said, "Miss, you've misunderstood. We're only excited because we saw a talent that only appears once in 1,000 years. Your child is a heavenly spirit vein, 1 in 10,000. Forget about ancient hill sect. Even in the entire cultivation world, there had not been a single person with the heavenly spirit vein appearing for thousands of years. Once this child returns, he would definitely become the personal succeeding disciple of the various elders. How could they not be excited?" The corner of Zhu Yao's lips twitched. She was instantly struck by the words "your child," to the point where she could not stand up. Did she look like someone who had such a big child? Recalling the age of childbearing in ancient times. Alright, she did look a little like it. He's not my child. This point had to be made clear. The middle-aged man was startled for a moment. Sizing Zhu Yao up, his brows lightly furrowed. Hey, what's with that expression of yours? As though you're looking at a human trafficker. I was entrusted by his parents to bring him here. You're the human trafficker, bastard. Only then did the middle-aged man understand and nod his head. However, he was still a little doubtful. This child's spirit vein is superior, and he will definitely have great achievements in the future. We will stay here for a day, and then we can bid farewell to our parents. Who knows if you guys are going to kidnap and sell the child? No, he had to hurry and bring Little Wimp back. Deity, you're saying I've been chosen? At such a crucial moment, Little Wimp popped out. Seeing the 4 of them nod, he instantly popped out from Zhu Yao's embrace. Before she could even react, he had already joyfully stood in the middle of the row of children she had chosen. As he ran, he even proudly said, "Great, what a pig-like teammate." Zhu Yao's face silently darkened, but fortunately they would stay for a day. When the time comes, they would hand Little Wimp over to Dr. Wang, and it would no longer be her problem. Left with no choice, she could only take 2 steps back with Little Wimp. Looking at Little Wimp, who was already excitedly chatting with the other children, she silently sighed. "Don't be too sad." Little Wimp seemed to have sensed her gloomy mood, as he suddenly came closer. Pulling onto her hand, he said, "Don't worry. Earlier, I asked the 4 uncles, and they said I can bring 1 person to the deity sect. Then, I'll save myself the trouble of bringing you along." Chapter 3. However, under her gaze, Little Wimp's little face slowly reddened, and he stuttered. In any case, you've touched me before. My father said, a man must be able to support both heaven and earth. I'll take responsibility. On the way here, I've already decided that if I'm chosen, I'll definitely bring you along." Zhu Yao was even more surprised. This Little Wimp couldn't be talking about spanking his butt, right? Because she touched his butt, he felt that he had to take responsibility? Zhu Yao was a little speechless. "Little Wimp, you're so imaginative at such a young age. Does your family know about it? In any case, I won't leave you behind." Little Wimp stomped his feet and became even more awkward. Zhu Yao suddenly wanted to tease him. "Then what if you're not chosen?" Little Wimp was startled. and then he scratched his head. His little lips were clearly pouting unhappily, as though he was a little dissatisfied that she did not believe in him. He snorted, "If I'm not chosen, I'll take responsibility as well. When I grow up, I'll definitely marry you." Before Zhu Yao could even feel touched, he raised his head, glanced at her, and then added, "Be my concubine." Mama's egg. She really wanted to beat him up until his mother couldn't recognize him. Little Wimp seemed to have expected her to be angry, as he turned around and dove into the group of children on the stage. He even turned around and made a face at her. Zhu Yao clenched her fists. She endured. "Little Wimp, just you wait. When we return later, I promise I won't beat you to death." Taking a few deep breaths, she calmed her emotions and looked below the stage. She realized that the number of people lining up did not seem to be decreasing in the slightest. Instead, there were more and more people. However, there were still not many children left on the stage. Including Little Wimp, there were less than 10 people. It seemed like children with spirit veins were still extremely rare. The probability was probably less than 1%. And among them, there were mostly tetrad and pentaspirit veins. Looking at the floating ball at the side, Zhu Yao could not help but feel a little curious. Not only could it float on its own, it could even change colors. Earlier, Little Beggar touched it with a mixture of green and gold, while Little Wimp touched it with red. She wondered what color she would be. For some reason, she reached out a finger and poked it. In an instant, the entire ball began to change colors. Green, blue, gold, red, 5 colors instantly filled the ball. Pentaspirit veins. The middle-aged man in charge of the test noticed her little action, but he was not angry. There would always be parents who would send their children over, and they would also want to test their spiritual roots out of curiosity. He was already used to it. Furthermore, this was a lady who had brought along a genius with a heaven spiritual root. Naturally, he wouldn't bicker with her. He did have spirit roots, but it was a pity that it was the weakest of the 5 spirit roots. Moreover, he was already so old. Even if he cultivated, there was no hope for him to become an immortal. Hearing him say pentaspirit veins, Zhu Yao sighed as well. In any case, she was a transmigrator, and she had even thought that she possessed a tyrannical, cool, and heaven-shattering spirit veins. So it was actually the worst pentaspirit veins. It seemed like she was still more suited to walk the path of a commoner's wife. Why didn't the heavens just give her some special spiritual root? Zhu Yao was a little disappointed, and just as she was about to retract her finger, suddenly, the ball that had turned into 5 colors suddenly twisted, and the 5 colors mixed into a ball. A small bolt of lightning suddenly appeared, and began to spread to the entire ball. Suddenly, with a bang, the floating ball suddenly shattered on the ground. Zhu Yao still maintained the posture of stretching out a finger, and froze on the spot. She couldn't be the one who broke it, right? Clearly, it was fine when so many children pressed on it earlier. So why did it break the moment she poked it? Is there any use in apologizing now? She weakly raised her head to look at the 4 white-clothed men, only to see that the 4 of them did not reply, and were simply looking at her with dumbfounded expressions. Zhu Yao instantly had the urge to break into a run. They wouldn't make her pay for it, right? She was a commoner's wife. Could she afford to pay for it with spring and fields? I didn't do it on purpose. In any case, she had to try and admit her mistake. You are. The middle-aged man reached out his trembling hand and pointed at her. His face was still lifeless. Zhu Yao weakly took a step back. She was scared to tears, you know? I don't have money. What I saw earlier. Could it be? Another white-clothed man stood over and stared at Zhu Yao. He stared intensely at Zhu Yao. Great, it was too late for her to run now. There shouldn't be any mistake. White-clothed man number 3 came over as well. He was much calmer than the previous 2. We must immediately inform the sect master of this matter. White-clothed man number 4, who was also the youngest among the 4, solemnly sized her up. This matter is of utmost importance. We must immediately return to the sect. Yes, Senior Marshal Uncle Li. The 3 replied in unison. Currently, Zhu Yao no longer had the mind to care about why the younger they were in this sect, the higher their seniority, because she was about to be kidnapped by the 4 of them. The youngest one, the so-called Senior Marshal Uncle Li, waved his hand and tossed out an object. Suddenly, a gigantic leaf appeared in the air. It steadily stopped in midair, while the other three made some hand seals. The children who were chosen earlier on the stage, as well as Zhu Yao, felt their feet turn light, and they flew towards the leaf. When she regained her senses, she was already standing on the leaf. Hey, what happened to staying for a day? They couldn't be thinking of kidnapping her back to the sect to interrogate her, right? Wait a minute. I can explain. I really didn't do it on purpose. The user can't be blamed for the poor quality of the product. Unfortunately, the four of them did not listen to her at all, as though they were in a rush to capture her and report back to the sect. They simply waved their hands and enveloped her and the children with a layer of transparent barrier. Then, the four of them walked to the front of the leaf and cast a mystic art to fly into the sky. They completely did not give Zhu Yao the chance to explain at all. Zhu Yao's face darkened. Standing at the center of the 7 or 8 little radishes, she had a faint bad premonition. As expected, the group of little radishes had already angrily stared at her. Hey, little kid. Do you have to look at me with those eyes that are gritting your teeth? You broke a deity's treasure. You're a bad person. A little girl with 2 braided braids was the first to question her. Big sister didn't do it on purpose. You've done something wrong, yet you refuse to admit it. As expected, you're a bad person. Another little boy popped out to question her. The hell, what does it have to do with you? Seeing that someone had stepped out, the other children surrounded her as well, and began to criticize her one after another. Zhu Yao instantly felt a slight headache. Please, even she herself did not know what was going on. Why were you bunch of little wimps so agitated for? We will compensate you. You're not allowed to bully her. I will beat up whoever dares to bully her. At the crucial moment, little wimp Wang suddenly popped out, blocked in front of her, and even raised his little fist threateningly. Zhu Yao was a little touched. At least you have a conscience. As expected, I didn't help you for nothing. She will be my concubine in the future. Bullying her is the same as bullying me. Mama's egg, I really want to slap him. Probably because they were frightened by little wimp Wang. The little radishes no longer surrounded her. I said that I will take responsibility for you. Seeing that everyone had dispersed, little wimp said to her with a prideful look. Facing that little face of his, Zhu Yao gave a round of beating, and with gritted teeth she said, Then, I really have to thank you, little husband of King Little Husband. Little wimp struggled for a moment, weakly took 2 steps back, distancing himself from her demonic claws. Rubbing his little face with a wronged look, he said, I have a name. I'm called Wang Shuji. We haven't gotten married yet. You can't call me that. After saying that, he ran off with a red face. Chapter 4. Glancing at the 4 people in front of her, who were concentrating on casting their arts, she instantly felt a little guilty. Just what were these people trying to do? Was that ball really that important? In the cultivation world, shouldn't there be items that could test spirit veins everywhere? Even if it was broken, there was no need to capture her to punish her, right? Thinking about how she, a pure and innocent person, had suddenly become a negative asset, and would most likely have to spend the rest of her life paying off her debts, she felt terrible. Mommy, I really want to go home. Just when Zhu Yao was feeling uneasy, the scenery in front of her instantly changed. Earlier, when they were flying in the sky, she could only see endless white clouds. Suddenly, as though a curtain had been pulled open, the white clouds scattered. Mountains of various sizes floated in the sky. Water flowed down from the mountains, like thin silver ribbons, into the sea. Zhu Yao was instantly dumbfounded by this game-like scene. She never expected that in reality, she would actually be able to see such a scenery. The leaf boat they were riding on flew towards the biggest mountain among the mountains, but stopped a few hundred feet away. Marshal Uncle Li, the youngest of the 4, took out a wooden plate with the word order on it and threw it into the air. Outside the mountain, a plastic film-like material cracked open, and a crack big enough for the leaf boat to pass through appeared. After the boat passed through, it automatically closed up and became invisible. Zhu Yao guessed that this should be something similar to a great mountain barrier formation. Only after taking a closer look did she realize that on top of the mountain floating in the sky, there were palaces of various sizes, and the place they were heading to was the plaza in front of the largest palace. When she finally landed, she realized that the plaza was already filled with radish heads. After taking a closer look, there were more than 100 of them. The crowd was divided into a few waves, and at the front of every wave stood 4 white-clothed people. Zhu Yao instantly understood that these were the people who went out to recruit students. After Senior Marshal Uncle Li landed, he simply greeted his peers and whispered a few words. A moment later, all the white-clothed people on the plaza, without exception, turned to look at her. Zhu Yao instantly felt a huge pressure. She wanted to hide behind the crowd, but the people present were all half-height radish heads. Even if she wanted to hide, she couldn't, unless she stacked 2 radish heads together. She turned to look at the skinny little friend Wang Shuji and considered the feasibility of this method. However, the other party seemed to have sensed her thoughts and slipped into the crowd, leaving her far behind. Little wimp. No sense of loyalty. Marshal Uncle Li, this matter is of great importance. We can't care about the rules anymore. Let's quickly go in and inform the sect master. The white-clothed people seemed to have finally come up with a plan. One of the female disciples pointed to the great hall in front of them and suggested, before turning to look at Zhu Yao strangely. The white-robed man surnamed Li seemed to have accepted her suggestion. He also glanced at her, then turned around and quickly walked into the hall. Zhu Yao felt even more guilty in her heart. Why did she feel that this matter was getting more and more serious? Was it too late to run now? Although the bottom of the mountain was the sea, she knew how to swim. I am Qining, a disciple of the thriving Glory Hall of the Sword Peak. Junior sister, how should I address you? The woman who was talking to Junior Uncle Li earlier walked over and asked with a smile. See, here it comes, the interrogation has begun. I'm Zhu Yao. That, Miss Chen, about that crystal ball, I really didn't do it on purpose. Sister, you must believe me. Qining, however, smiled even more gently. Since you've entered Ancient Hill Sect, then we're fellow disciples. You can just call me Senior Marshal Sister. Junior Marshal Sister, you don't have to worry. The sect master will naturally make a decision regarding the matters of the sect. I still have to meet the sect master. He couldn't be asking her to stay and work to pay off the debt, right? Qining nodded. According to the sect's rules, new disciples must first learn the sect's rules in the discipline hall for a month, before the various mountain lords take them in as disciples, leaving behind a promising talent. However, Junior Marshal Sister's situation is a little special, so we need to first inform the sect master to make a decision. Special? Especially unlucky? She owed a debt the moment she entered. Qining had even said a few other things. Unfortunately, Zhu Yao's mind was filled with the matter of the shattered crystal ball, and she completely did not listen to her. The other party seemed to be able to tell that her heart was not here as well, and simply did not speak any further. A moment later, Senior Marshal Uncle Li, who had just entered, came out. The sect master has ordered for you to enter, Senior Marshal Uncle Li said to her. Zhu Yao took a deep breath. In any case, she would have to pay the debt sooner or later, so she might as well go. Gritting her teeth, she followed after him. Senior Marshal Uncle Li, is the sect master very angry? She had to mentally prepare herself. He turned around and glanced at her. Towards her question, he did not have the cold expression he had in the town back then, and replied in a very gentle manner. Our sect master has a gentle temperament. Why would he be angry? Oh, it's good that he's not angry. Everything can be discussed. Only after walking into the hall did she realize that there were 6 people seated inside. 5 of them sat at the bottom, while 1 sat in the middle. He should be the so-called sect master. He looked to be in his 40s, and he carried a smile on his face. Just as Senior Marshal Uncle Li said, he indeed looked like a gentle person. This woman is. Seeing Zhu Yao enter, the sect master turned his head and asked Senior Marshal Uncle Li who was leading the way. Replying to sect master, it's indeed her. Hearing this, the expression on the sect master's face became even more astonished. After sizing her up for a moment, he spoke. Why is she so old? The corner of Zhu Yao's lips twitched, and she instantly became unhappy. It's enough as long as you don't despise me. What face do you have to say that I'm old? Uncle, I'm 28 this year, thank you. Don't you know that a woman's age is a taboo? The sect master was startled, as though he did not expect that she would talk back, or perhaps he realized that his question was indeed a little inappropriate. Coughing, he waved his hand, and suddenly, a ball that was exactly the same as the one she shattered appeared in the center of the hall. However, it was even bigger and more transparent than the one before. Little miss, put your hand on it. Zhu Yao instantly widened her eyes. Looking at the ball in front of her, she silently took a step back. She had a phobia of balls. I really accidentally broke one back then. I'm afraid. She weakly reached out a finger. So, it's best if I don't put it on. It's fine, you just have to put it on. The sect master thought that she was afraid, and encouraged her with a smile. Don't be afraid. I can guarantee that nothing will happen to you. You won't blame me if it's broken. It seemed like he had quite a lot of stock in stock. Then why did he bring her back? Naturally, I won't blame you. Then the one that broke in the town earlier. It's not your fault either. Why didn't you say so earlier? She made her heart thump all the way. So he wasn't asking her to pay for the crystal ball. Zhu Yao pressed onto that ball. As long as she wasn't asked to pay for it, forget about putting her hand on it. She could even hug the ball. The moment Zhu Yao's hand came into contact with the ball, tiny lightning bolts instantly filled the entire ball. In less than 5 seconds, just like before, the ball shattered with a resounding sound. As I thought, the sect master uncle suddenly stood up. His face was already filled with excitement. Turning his head, he looked towards Senior Marshal Uncle Li below. Hurry, head to Jade Forest Mountain, and inform your ancestral Grand Master of this matter. Yes. When Senior Marshal Uncle Li walked out of the door, the sect master finally calmed down his excited emotions. His face, which was initially gentle, when he looked at Zhu Yao, was even more benevolent. What's your name? What's your name, uncle? Knowing that she did not have to pay for her debt, Zhu Yao's mood instantly brightened up, as she blurted out. A certain uncle. How dare you? A red-clothed woman sitting below loudly berated, as she looked at Zhu Yao with an accusing look. Do you know who's sitting in front of you? I don't. If she knew, why would she even bother asking? You. The red-clothed woman was furious. How are you going to become a great talent if you're so arrogant? Right now, you're still a mere mortal. If your cultivation is successful in the future, won't you be deceiving your master and destroying your ancestors? Senior Marshal brother, I feel that this matter still needs to be discussed. Junior Marshal sister, calm down. The sect master waved his hand and said, you should know how hard it is to obtain this kind of aptitude as well. In these 10,000 years, there has only been one. The white-clothed woman still had a dissatisfied look. Although that's the case, this woman is already old. Even if she has an exceptional aptitude, I'm afraid it'll be hard for her to form her Azoth core before her lifespan ends. When that time comes, wouldn't it still be a waste of effort? Junior Marshal sister, this. Chapter 5. The red-clothed woman, however, became even more furious. How dare you? You've done something wrong, yet you still don't know how to repent. You've actually committed the same offense again, interrupting someone else's conversation. Did your mother not teach you manners? Yo, this temper of mine. Who doesn't know how to curse? And what kind of manners did your mother learn? Before talking about someone else, have you ever looked at yourself in the mirror? Mama's egg. She had never suffered such indignation in her entire life. She was furious. This red-clothed lady, Zhu Yao did not give her the chance to speak at all. If interrupting someone else's conversation is considered as having no manners, then just now, you interrupting my conversation with the sect master, is that considered as having manners? As strangers, asking each other's names is a normal thing in the first place. Yet you suddenly came out and scolded me for being bold? I don't understand. How is asking for a name considered bold? Then may I ask, where did your manners go to? The red-clothed woman's face turned green. You, as an uninitiated disciple, you actually directly asked for the sect master's name, and you still say it's not bold? He was the one who asked for my name first. before asking for someone else's name. Isn't it polite to report your own name first? And you said it yourself, I'm an uninitiated disciple. Although I'm uninitiated, I'm not your disciple. I'm just an unrelated person, someone who is completely unrelated to you all. What does it have to do with me whether he's the sect master or not? Why can't I just ask him directly? You're twisting words. If you can't win, you say others are twisting words. And when you can win, you think others are bold. May I ask this lady, is this how your mother taught you? You. Let me give this lady a word of advice. Don't think too highly of yourself. Not everyone will give you face. Do you think everyone in this world is your mother? Impudent. The red-clothed lady seemed to be flustered. She condensed a flame in her hand and threw it towards Zhu Yao. Zhu Yao was furious from embarrassment and was about to start a fight. Junior Martial Sister. At the crucial moment, the sect master uncle made his move. A stream of water condensed in his hand, extinguishing the flame. Don't be rash. The red-clothed lady took a few deep breaths and finally calmed down. However, her eyes were still staring straight at Zhu Yao, as though she could pounce over and eat her at any moment. Only then did Zhu Yao feel a little fearful. The hell, how could she have forgotten that this was a Xianxia world? These people were existences that could instantly kill her at any moment. But who asked him to insult her mother? Whose parents weren't a taboo in their children's hearts? Moreover, she was a transmigrator, so she might not be able to see her parents for the rest of her life. She just had to bump into him. Wouldn't he bite her to death? Little girl, you should calm down as well. I'm sure you've already guessed that your talent is extraordinary. The sect leader began to act as a middleman. If you join our sect, we will do everything in our power to nurture you. Are you willing? Not willing. Cough, cough, cough. The sect leader almost choked. What did you say? With her aptitude, she would definitely be able to enter the Jade Forest Mountain. The Jade Forest Mountain was a place that the entire cultivation world wanted to enter no matter how hard they tried. Although she was still quite young, with those two's abilities, it wouldn't be a problem for them to form their gold core before their lifespans ran out. Do you know the place you're going to is the Jade Forest Mountain? I don't want to know. It was none of her business. Why? Zhu Yao courteously rolled her eyes at the uncle. Do you think I'm stupid? I've offended that junior martial sister of yours today. If I were to really enter your sect, wouldn't she torture me to death? The sect leader uncle's face was a little distorted, although what this girl said was not impossible. But wasn't this a little too straightforward? He glanced at the junior martial sister at the side, whose face had already turned green and black. Was it really suitable to say such words? Was it really suitable? Cuckoo, you really don't want to cultivate? This is a huge opportunity. I don't want to. So that's how it is. Zhu Yao shrugged and said, I'll go back to where I came from. Bye-bye. Wait a minute. Before the sect leader could even stop her, Zhu Yao had already joyfully ran towards the entrance. This girl, why was she acting so irrationally? Suddenly, a violent gust of wind blew, and a white-clothed man instantly appeared at the entrance. Before Zhu Yao could even see him clearly, she had already bumped into him. And then, she got a bump and her anger rose. Are you blind when you're walking? Move. The entire hall instantly turned silent. A moment later, the man who was bumped into slowly took a step to the side. Only then did Zhu Yao step out of the door. Before she left, she did not forget to roll her eyes at him. So what if you have muscles? Humph. Ancestral granduncle. That girl has the lightning spirit vein. The sect leader spoke up in a timely manner. When the man at the entrance heard this, he immediately pulled onto the person, who just walked out of the door. Zhu Yao was walking in a hurry, so when she was suddenly pulled, she once again bumped into the man. Hence she got another bump. Zhu Yao stroked the two bumps that suddenly swelled up on her head, and raised her head to look at the man with a cold expression. I say, big bro, do I have a grudge against you? The man was startled for a moment, and then, he replied with an extremely serious tone. No. If you don't, then why are you pulling my ass? Are you trying to pick a fight? The man lowered his head and pondered for a moment, and then, he replied with an even more serious tone. I'm not pulling your ass, I'm pulling your hand. Take a deep breath. Don't be angry, don't be angry. The weather is so beautiful. It's not good to be so irritable. It's not good. Count it as my bad luck. I'll have to trouble you to move away smoothly. Don't block my path, all right? Thank you. The man frowned and decisively rejected her. No way. Just what are you trying to do? Not only did he want to knock her 2 bumps out, could it be that he wanted to knock out a Sakyamuni? Kneel, acknowledge me as your master. Acknowledge your sister, who said she wanted to acknowledge him as her master. The man's frown deepened, and he still coldly said, Acknowledge me. I don't have a little sister. Chapter 6. Greetings, great martial uncle. Uncle sect leader, and the rest of the people also walked out. He bowed respectfully to the man at the door. Looking at Zhu Yao, he said, Is ancestral grand uncle going to take this girl as his disciple? He had thought that with her age, the other party would at most take her in as an inner disciple. He did not expect that the other party would directly take her in as a disciple. The man calmly looked at the crowd and said, Personal disciple. What? The woman in red had a look of disbelief on her face. She took a step forward and said, Great martial uncle, with her age, even if she has the rare thunder spirit root, we can only accept one direct disciple. Her age, isn't it inappropriate? The man turned to look at the woman in red. His face was still as cold as ice. He asked doubtfully, What does it have to do with you? The red-clothed woman was rendered speechless. She had no choice but to shift her gaze, and fiercely stared at Zhu Yao at the side. A certain someone was silently implicated. So what did it have to do with her? For a moment, he felt as if he had barged into a mental hospital. Acknowledge me as your master. A certain ice mountain man turned around and continued to fire at Zhu Yao. Zhu Yao silently darkened for a moment. I say, big bro, let's discuss this. Why must I acknowledge you as my master? Because you have the thunder spirit root. The ice mountain man said coolly. Oh. Zhu Yao nodded. May I ask if there are any laws that stipulate that lightning spirit veins must acknowledge you as their master? The iceberg man frowned even deeper, but he still shook his head. Then where the fuck do you get the confidence that I must be your disciple? Do you believe that I will spit salt soda in your face? The ice mountain man seemed to have been stumped by this question, and only after a long while did he slowly speak. Only my Jade Forest Mountain has a mystic art for lightning spirit vein practitioners, so you must enter my sect. He lowered his head and looked straight at her. What does this have to do with whether my mother is confident or not? Qingyi took a deep breath. In a harmonious society, one shouldn't bite others. Why must I cultivate that cultivation technique? He said matter-of-factly. If you want to become an immortal, you must cultivate this technique. Zhu Yao retracted her hand and sneered. Sorry. I don't want to become a deity. Thank you, goodbye. The iceberg man seemed to be shocked by her thoughts, and was stunned on the spot. Zhu Yao also took the opportunity to happily slip away. Unfortunately, he hadn't reached his second uncle yet. The iceberg man suddenly caught up again. It wasn't that he didn't try hard enough, but the enemy was too strong. Although Zhu Yao was running, the ice mountain man was like a gust of wind. In an instant he caught up to Zhu Yao, and did not speak any more nonsense. He grabbed her and flew up to the highest mountain peak in the sky. Zhu Yao simply felt a wave of dizziness in front of her, and her head once again crashed into the iceberg man. Unintentionally, a third bump. Fuck me. When she came back to her senses, she was already standing on a piece of green ground. The iceberg man was still standing in front of her. Acknowledge me as your master. Big brother Bing, can't you use something new? The iceberg man paused for a moment, then said, I'll accept a disciple. Is there a difference? My surname is Yu, not Bing. My word is Yen. Since you've entered my sect, you'll naturally take my surname. I shall bestow upon you the name of Wang. Desire, your sister. Who needs a word from you? I don't want to cultivate. Yu Wang is you. I've said it before, I don't have a younger sister. She laid on the ground. She had never felt that communicating in Chinese was so hard. Zhu Yao felt like crying. Big brother, I'm begging you, please let me go. I really don't want to cultivate. Please let me scram back to where I came from. Yu Yen was startled for a moment, and still coldly replied. I'm accepting you as my disciple, not to acknowledge you as my little sister. You should call me master, not big brother. Chapter 7. Yuyan simply could not understand this new disciple of his. Although it was said that a natural-born lightning spirit vein was already a physique that was destined to ascend. Even if her age was too old, it was not a big deal. The body of a practitioner was merely an outer appearance. Although the younger one was, the more successful one's cultivation would be. However, he was confident that with his Jade Forest Mountain's abilities, he would definitely be able to help her form her Azoth core on the day her lifespan ends. When that time comes, there would no longer be a problem of age. His Jade Forest Mountain had been passed down for thousands of years. Yet, there were only a few disciples under his sect. Yet, more than half of the successors had already ascended to the divine realm. This was probably because they only accepted disciples with lightning spirit veins. And lightning spirit veins were the most unique spirit veins in this world. Every practitioner had to go through 6 stages: essence, foundation, Azoth, nascent soul, demigod, and ascension. And every stage was further divided into 10 levels. 1 to 5 were the early stages, 6 to 9 were the middle stages, and above the 10th level, there was also the Paragon stage. These were 4 small stages. Every time a practitioner below the Azoth core stage advanced, they would definitely face a lightning tribulation. A small stage was the 3-9 minor lightning tribulation, and a large stage was the 9-9 great lightning tribulation. The heavenly lightning was the purest and cleanest lightning spiritual energy in this world, and it could annihilate all living beings in this world. Hence, during the lightning tribulation, one could only use the entire body's cultivation to defend against it, in order to endure it. But, even if one could endure these lightning tribulations, there was still the 9th-stage, heavenly tribulation during ascension. The might of the 81 bolts of purple extreme heavenly lightning was tens of millions of times stronger than a normal lightning tribulation. In this world, how many mighty figures had fallen under this purple extreme heavenly lightning? And there were even demigods who did not dare to try the purple extreme heavenly lightning even at the end of their lifespan. Except for the lightning spirit vein. Lightning spirit veins were born with the ability to absorb lightning spiritual energy. Hence, to them, the heavenly tribulation was not a tribulation, but a large amount of spiritual energy absorption. With such a heaven-defying spirit vein, it was impossible for them not to ascend. However, this type of spirit vein was extremely rare. The last time a lightning spirit vein appeared was 16,000 years ago, and that person was Yuyan. At the age of 3, he became a disciple of a master. At the age of 5, he reached the peak of Qi cultivation. At the age of 10, he reached the foundation building realm. At the age of 20, he reached the core formation realm. At the age of 100, he reached the nascent soul realm. At the age of 1,000, he reached the soul formation realm. It must be said that this terrifying speed was a legend in the cultivation world. However, such a legend had been stuck at the soul formation stage for 10,000 years. It was not that he was unable to ascend, but in these 10,000 years, he had actually not found a single disciple with the lightning spirit vein. And in the entire cultivation world, only ancient hill sects Jade Forest Mountain possessed the cultivation method for lightning spirit vein. If he were to ascend, this lineage would no longer have a successor. That was why even though he already had the body of an immortal, he remained in the lower realms, waiting for a successor. And now, the inheritor had finally arrived, but she seemed to be very unwilling. Even when he gave her a name, she revealed a strange expression. She only wanted to return to the mortal world. Could it be that his Jade Forest Summit, the capital of the divine realm, could not compare to the filthy lands of the mortal realm? Yuyan expressed that he was very unhappy. Please, I really don't want to cultivate into a deity. Please let me go, and let me happily roll about. Zhu Yao was about to cry. She did not want to be called Desire. Yuyan lightly frowned. With a thought, he chanted an incantation, and Zhu Yao, who was still trying to convince him earlier, had already knelt onto the ground. What are you trying to do? Zhu Yao was startled. He couldn't possibly want to kill her out of anger and embarrassment. Just when she was about to climb up, Her body had already uncontrollably turned towards the iceberg man in front of her, and kowtowed 3 times consecutively. Before she could even react, Yuyin once again reached out 2 fingers and lightly tapped on her forehead. She simply felt an ice-cold energy seeping into her forehead, and instantly, she felt a warm current surging through her entire body. And on her forehead, a petal-shaped imprint appeared. From today onwards, you are my personal succeeding disciple. And this imprint is the proof that I have taken you in as my disciple. Come to the Jade Forest Summit tomorrow morning. I will naturally teach you the art of deity cultivation. After saying that, his figure flashed, and Zhu Yao could no longer see his figure in front of her. Reaching out her hand, she touched her forehead, which still had a hint of ice-cold feeling. Zhu Yao wanted to cry, but no tears came out. Zhu Yao, who was being forced to cultivate into a deity, expressed that she was unhappy as well. She deeply sighed. It seemed like it was impossible to reason with that person. The 2 of them were basically not on the same channel. Turning her head to look at her surroundings, she could only see a lush grassland and mountains and rivers that filled her vision. She felt like crying even more. Where was this? At the very least, he could point the way. Was it really all right to disappear irresponsibly like this? She wondered how little Wimp was doing. Thinking about it, she had initially wanted to do a good deed, but in the end, she had dug herself into this mess. Doing a good deed these days was not easy either. Now, it seemed like the only path she could take was to become a disciple of a deity cultivation. The problem now was, where was she going? Earlier, the iceberg man said that he wanted her to look for him at the Jade Forest Summit. Zhu Yao looked at the towering mountain in front of her and instantly went berserk. Crash! This mountain peak that looked like Mount Everest. You're kidding me, right? At this moment, Zhu Yao finally understood what was meant by, if you don't seek death, you won't die. She really regretted rejecting the iceberg man's request to take her in as his disciple earlier. In the end, in a fit of anger, not only did he forcefully refuse to sell her, he even threw her in this desolate mountain, leaving her to fend for herself. Wasn't it just taking her in as a disciple? It's not like she would suffer any losses. And looking at the attitude of the group of people in the Great Hall towards that person earlier, this master of hers was definitely an extremely awesome person. Having a person like this as her backing was not a bad thing either. Even if she had offended that red-clothed woman earlier, most probably, she would not dare to find trouble with her. But if she were to return to the mortal realm, who knew how he would deal with her? This was evidently a savior that had descended from the heavens. After thinking through all these, the resentment Zhu Yao had towards this weird master of hers instantly disappeared completely. Instead, a sense of gratitude rose, and she even became more energetic while climbing the mountain. However, this gratitude was completely ground away under the mountain peak that she could not climb to no matter how hard she tried. Mama's egg, she finally understood why that iceberg man wanted her to look for him tomorrow morning. Because she had been climbing for an entire day and night. Only when the sun was already hanging in the middle of the sky on the second day did she finally climb to that damned mountain peak. She was just short of being as tired as a dog, as she laid on the ground, unable to move at all. And a certain master, who had been sitting in his room for an entire night, waited for his disciple to report in, and was about to personally check on her, open the door, only to see a stiff corpse lying on the ground, unmoving in front of his door. His entire body was covered in mud, his hair was a mess, and even his face was covered in bruises, as though he had been hit by something. Chapter 8. In just a single night, just how did she turn herself into such a sorry state? Yu Yin frowned. With a wave of his hand, he cast an art. Zhu Yao, who was still extremely tired earlier, simply felt a warm current filling her entire body. The fatigue in her body was completely swept away, and even her heavy breathing earlier had calmed down. So this is a mystic art. How magical. Seeing that his new disciple had finally crawled back up, Yu Yin finally relaxed. He sized her up for a moment, and suddenly had a thought. Could it be, you walked up the mountain? The corner of Zhu Yao's lips twitched. What else? It's not like she knew how to fly. Yu Yin looked at her strangely. Why didn't you use the teleportation formation at the foot of the mountain? Could it be to train her and show him her determination to become a deity? When he thought of this, Yu Yan's expression instantly turned a lot better, and he was a little more satisfied with this disciple of his, who often said silly things. It seemed like although this disciple of his was not very smart, she was still diligent. A certain diligent disciple. His heart was already flipping the table endlessly. The hell? Why didn't you say so earlier that there's a teleportation formation? After taking in a few deep breaths, Zhu Yao held back from charging forward and slashing his face. She had no choice but to lower her head when she was under someone else's roof. Furthermore, he was her future backer. Disciple greets master. Zhu Yao lowered her body and gave a proper bow. Amen. Yu Yan nodded, and his heart was instantly filled with great satisfaction. It had been more than 10,000 years, and he could be considered to have a disciple now. At the very least, he did not let down his master's warning before he ascended, and Jade Forest sect finally had a successor. Unknowingly, the more he looked at the disciple in front of him, the more pleasing he felt, and he wished that he could charge forward and hug her. He sized up his disciple's size. If only she was a little smaller. Why didn't she come to acknowledge him as her master earlier? Yu Yan's thoughts raced, however. His face was still as cold as ever, without the slightest expression. With a casual wave of his hand, Zhu Yao's clothes, which were already filthy beyond recognition, instantly returned to its original state. Even those old stains, which she could not wash off in the past, had disappeared. Amazing. Zhu Yao curiously pulled at her clean clothes. A powerful stain removal technique. Cultivation was actually so fun. Master, are you going to teach your disciple this mystic art? With this, she did not have to wash clothes in the future. It was too convenient. The dirt removal spell is just an entry-level spell. Once you learn how to absorb qi into your body, you will naturally know how to use it. Yu Yan lightly said. You've just entered the sect, so familiarize yourself with the environment first. The spiritual energy is still the most abundant in the morning. Tomorrow morning, I will teach you how to guide spiritual energy into your body. Zhu Yao nodded. In any case, she was going to stay here for a very long time. Though she was curious about deity cultivation, there was no need to rush it. Follow me. Yu Yan walked past his disciple in front of him and walked towards the path she came from. He's already familiarizing himself with the environment. Zhu Yao raised her spirits and eagerly followed after him. Along the way, he tried to memorize his surroundings so that he would not get lost in the future. At noon, the Jade Forest mountain was very quiet. Only the occasional chirping of insects and chirping of birds could be heard. Other than trees, there were only trees. After memorizing for a moment, Zhu Yao no longer had the mood to do so. She couldn't possibly remember how every single tree looked like, right? She could only obediently follow behind him in silence. Yu Yan was not a talkative person. One could tell just by looking at that ice block face of his. And Zhu Yao was not that friendly either. Hence, the two of them did not speak during the entire journey. For hours later, Zhu Yao could no longer hold it in. Master isn't here yet? If they were to continue walking, the sky would turn dark. Yu Yan turned to look at her. We'll be arriving soon. Zhu Yao shut her mouth. Another 2 hours later, even if they were going down the mountain, her legs were about to break from walking. Yet, the person in front of her did not seem to have any intentions of stopping. What happened to the promise of arriving soon? Her heart was filled with suspicion, yet, she had no choice but to grit her teeth and follow along. Her gaze unconsciously swept across her surroundings. Why does that crooked tree look a little familiar? And that tortoise-like rock looks familiar as well. Even that red buttocks monkey seems to have been seen somewhere before. We're here. The person in front of her stopped. Zhu Yao looked at her surroundings for a moment. Mama's egg. Wasn't this the starting point when she ascended the mountain yesterday? Master brought her along for an entire afternoon. Why did he return to this place again? Did he want her to climb up again because he saw that she looked so good? He can't trick his disciple like this. Master. She really wanted to cry. Yu Yan looked at her pitiful face. What's the meaning of putting on such an expression? His disciple was being stupid again. Calmly choosing to ignore it, He pointed to the bushes 3 meters away from the right. That's the teleportation formation. Flying swords are not allowed in Jade Forest Mountain. You can use this formation to reach the mountain peak. Ah, so the reason why he brought her along this entire journey was to let her see this formation. Zhu Yao glanced at the verdant bushes over there. It didn't seem to be any different. Under Yu Yan's indication, she followed him and walked over, before standing still. Suddenly, a flash of light flashed beneath her feet. A circular formation lit up, and there were even faint symbols flashing within the formation. Immediately after, the white light grew brighter, and the scenery in front of her changed. She was already standing on the mountain peak. What a mystical formation! Zhu Yao's interest was piqued. She circled around the formation, which was still faintly flashing, and walked a few rounds. Yet, she was still unable to understand the principles behind its operation. As expected, deity cultivation was just this high and mighty. This formation can be used on 2 sides. You can use it to teleport down the mountain as well. Seeing that his disciple was interested in formations, Yu Yan took the initiative to explain. Really? Zhu Yao was a little excited as she hurriedly walked in. As expected, the light once again shone, and with a swoosh, she was once again standing next to the formation at the foot of the mountain. She once again stood on the formation, and with a swoosh, she returned to the mountain peak. Zhu Yao played around with it a few times, and could not help but admire the mystical properties of mystic arts. Compared to this, cars and planes were simply too weak. Wait a minute. She turned to look at her master, who still had a cold expression. Since this formation can be used to teleport each other, then why did Master bring me along the mountain path for an entire afternoon? Yu Yan was startled by her stare, as though he had thought of this question as well. Turning his face slightly, he covered up and said, "Rest early. Tomorrow, I will teach you how to take in spiritual energy into your body." After saying that, he turned around and entered the house, closing the door behind him. He must have been affected by his stupid disciple's intelligence. It definitely wasn't because he did not think of using formations to descend the mountain. Zhu Yao's expression darkened. Master had a skill called, specialized in scamming his disciple? She speechlessly looked at the straw hut in front of her. That's right, it was a straw hut. This master of hers, who looked so domineering and cool, was living in a straw hut, and it was the only straw hut in the entire mountain peak. Her surroundings were completely filled with wilderness. Then came the problem. Excavation skills. Apui, where was she going to rest tonight? Master, are you forgetting something? After silently studying the terrain for a long while, and confirming that there were no other places she could stay on the mountain peak, Zhu Yao had no choice but to accept her fate and knock on her master's door. After 3 short knocks, the door creaked and automatically opened. The furnishings in the room were very simple. Other than a bed, there was nothing else, and her master was currently meditating on the bed. What's the matter? Master, where am I staying today? Zhu Yao honestly asked. Chapter 9. He stood up and followed his disciple out. Looking at the location of his own cottage, he took out an item from the storage pouch next to him and threw it onto the empty ground. An exquisite 3-story building that was shining with golden light appeared next to the cottage. It dyed the entire night sky with the smell of sparkling jewels. Moss. Master. Zhu Yao's hand trembled as she pointed at the building that could even blind a dog's eyes. Living in a house like this, it's not good, right? You don't like it? Yu Yan raised his eyebrows. This house was obtained from a toad spirit that had cultivated for 1,000 years. Back then, when he took it away, although he did not really like it, looking at the toad spirit's eyes that were filled with everlasting regret, it must be a pretty good item. He had even thought that his little disciple would like it. Yu Yan lowered his head, continued to rummage through his storage pouch, and casually threw out another item. This time, it was a courtyard that was made out of jade. Under the reflection of the moonlight, a faint silver light flowed, and she could faintly see the even more luxurious decorations inside the house. Zhu Yao could not help but use her hand to support her chin that was about to drop. She seemed to have acknowledged an incredible tycoon as her master. She glanced at the golden house on the left, then at the jade house on the right, and then at the straw cottage in the middle that was made out of slag. Whichever one you like, you can just stay there, Yu Yan lightly said. Zhu Yao stared blankly at her own master, as though she could see him turning into a river god. With one hand holding onto the golden house, and the other holding onto the silver house, he said to her, "Brave young lady, did you lose this golden house, or this silver house?" Zhu Yao gulped down her saliva, and suppressed her own vanity. The story of the river god taught her that one had to be low profile. Her master lived in a straw cottage, and his disciple lived in a golden house and a silver house. "Master, it's best if you just give me a house like yours." Yu Yan tilted his head and looked at his disciple a little confusedly. Sighing, he revealed an expression that said as expected, "My disciple is really stupid." With a wave of his hand, he kept the two houses back, and then he cast an unknown art. At a speed visible to the naked eye, a straw cottage was built on the ground. Not even a moment later, an identical straw cottage was built. Zhu Yao thanked her master, and then stepped into her own house. He discovered that even the furnishings inside were exactly the same as his master's. Other than a wooden bed and a blanket, there was nothing else. Zhu Yao, who had been exhausted for 2 days and 1 night, could no longer care so much. Laying down, she immediately fell asleep. On the second day, Zhu Yao woke up very early. It was not because she was diligent, but because the bed in her room was simply too hard. She suddenly regretted rejecting those 2 luxurious houses back then. As expected, there was no need to be too pretentious in life. When it was time to make a move, one should make a move. Opening the door, Zhu Yao realized that her master was already waiting for her in the courtyard. His gaze swept over the dark circles under her eyes, and he frowned slightly, gesturing for her to sit down in the open space in front of him. Was he going to start cultivating? Zhu Yao became spirited, as she immediately ran over and sat cross-legged in front of her master. "Today, I will teach you how to guide spiritual energy into your body." Yu Yan tapped on the center of Zhu Yao's brows. "Close your eyes." Zhu Yao obediently closed her eyes. She simply felt a familiar stream of air entering from the center of her brows, and then it slowly circulated throughout her entire body. Then it converged at her dantian. Her entire body felt warm, and she was spirited. This is the method to circulate spiritual energy. Remember this method. When you sense spiritual energy, you can follow this method to guide spiritual energy. Seeing that she had comprehended it, Yu Yan retracted his hand. "Then how do I sense spiritual energy?" Zhu Yao asked. "That will depend on a person's comprehension ability," Yu Yan lightly said. Spiritual energy was the most mysterious thing in this world. Everyone had their own comprehension, and what everyone saw was different. Some people could sense it in an instant, while some people could not even sense a single strand of spiritual energy in their entire lives. As her master, he could only guide her, but he could not sense it for her. Close your eyes, empty your mind, and use your heart to sense it. Naturally, you will be able to sense it. Zhu Yao once again closed her eyes and slowly emptied her mind. However, she could only sink into darkness. A few minutes later, forget about sensing spiritual energy. She simply felt like sleeping. Her master also gave her a word of advice to not be anxious, and then left. She was the only one left to silently meditate. However, from meditating in the morning until noon, she still did not gain anything. In between, she had almost fallen asleep a few times. Other than feeling her waist aching, she did not feel anything else. Zhu Yao could no longer sit still. She decided to head out for a stroll and continue after she returned. Just when she arrived at the foot of the mountain from the teleportation formation, she saw a person flying over on a sword from afar. He looked like a male disciple and was dressed in the sect's white robe. He looked to be about 20 years old, and he even looked a little familiar. That person looked at Zhu Yao on the ground and politely smiled at her. Only then did Zhu Yao recall who he was. Senior Marshal Uncle Li? Wasn't this the youth who brought them to the sect? The youth's footsteps paused, and he bowed towards her a little startled. "This disciple is not worthy of you calling me Senior Marshal Uncle. Grand Marshal Uncle, please do not address me in such a manner." Just call this disciple by his Taoist name Zilin. Ah, didn't those little turnips all address him like that? Seeing her doubts, Li Lin continued. Sovereign Yu Yan is the person with the highest seniority in the sect. Even the sect master has to address him as Grand Marshal Uncle. You're Sovereign Yu Yan's disciple. So according to seniority, this disciple should address you as Grand Marshal Uncle. So her identity was actually that amazing. Zhu Yao instantly felt as though she had unlocked her golden finger. She then immediately found out some insider information from Li Lin. So the sect she entered was called Ancient Hill Sect. It was the most famous sect among the 5 sects and 8 sects in the cultivation world, and also the sect with the most disciples. In the sect, there were 3 demigod stage elders, and more than 10 nascent soul practitioners. The sect was divided into the inner and outer sect, and the inner sect was further divided into 6 mountains: Beast Taming Mountain, Sword Mountain, Talisman Mountain, Refining Mountain, Elixir Mountain, and the Jade Forest Mountain which she was at. Every mountain had its own specialties. For example, Sword Mountain specialized in using swords, Talisman Mountain specialized in creating talismans, etc. There were no less than 10,000 disciples in every mountain. Among them, Sword Mountain had the most. Sword Mountain was undoubtedly the strongest in the sect. Every single mountain was made up of sword practitioners, and the mountain master was even the sect master of Ancient Hill Sect, Reverend Zmo. He was the one who had tested her spirit veins in the Great Hall that day. The mountain masters of every mountain were all nascent soul practitioners. Thinking back to the few people who were seated in the Great Hall that day, they were definitely the mountain masters of the other mountains as well. And the woman she offended was the mountain master of Pellet Mountain, Reverend Hong Cho. Pellet Mountain specialized in refining divine medicine, and the mountain master was even a rare 9th-ranked pellet refiner in the divine realm. It was unavoidable for practitioners to borrow the aid of medicinal pellets to raise their cultivation. Naturally, there were many times when they would request for help from Pellet Mountain. It could be said that no one would easily offend a pellet refiner, let alone a 9th-ranked one. And she just had to offend one. Chapter 10. The reason why Li Lin ascended the mountain this time was to look for Zhu Yao to handle the entry procedures and receive her identity tablet. Every single new disciple of Ancient Hill Sect had to undergo a month's worth of sect knowledge, which was equivalent to an induction training. Then, the various mountains would choose a few disciples with good qualities to become sect disciples. Those who were not chosen would be assigned to the outer sect. After they built their foundation, they would then enter the inner sect, but they might not be accepted as disciples by the mountain lord. Initially, Zhu Yao wanted to go as well, but her spirit vein was unique, so she did not have to go through this process, and was immediately accepted as a disciple, and a personal succeeding disciple at that. Li Lin glanced at the divine imprint on Zhu Yao's forehead that only belonged to personal succeeding disciples, and could not help but feel envious in his heart. Usually, practitioners would only have a single personal succeeding disciple. Unless the other party died, they would not accept another personal succeeding disciple. However, who asked her to have the lightning spirit vein? Because Zhu Yao did not know how to fly a sword, Li Lin had no choice but to take out that large leaf from before, and carried her all the way to the main mountain. Grand Marshal Ant, this way please. Li Lin led Zhu Yao into a large hall. His attitude was so respectful that she felt a little embarrassed. You can just call me Zhu Yao. Being called Grand Marshal Ant by someone of the same age, she felt a little strange. Li Lin simply smiled, and did not refute. However, he did not dare to directly agree either, and simply instructed a person who seemed to be the manager of the hall. The middle-aged man's expression instantly tensed up. From afar, he gave her a deep bow and called out, Grand Marshal Granduncle, Zhu Yao. Grand Marshal Ant, do not mind it. In the cultivation world, cultivation is respected. You becoming Sovereign Yu Yan's disciple, this sort of thing will become normal in the future. Li Lin comforted her a few words, and led her to a chair at the side to sit down. Then he dismissed that uncle, and continued to explain to her. The identity tablet of Jade Forest Mountain will require a period of time to be completed. Grand Marshal Ant, Please wait here for a moment. Zhu Yao nodded. Sitting on the chair, she curiously sized up her surroundings. This should be the place where the sex matters were handled, as there weren't many people here. Occasionally, one or two would enter, bow towards Li Lin, and then walk towards a counter in the middle. Sometimes they would take out something, hand it to the person at the counter, and then leave. This is where we hand in our missions. Seeing that she was interested, Li Lin pointed at the signboards hanging on the four walls and explained, the sect will often give out some missions. As long as you have the ability, you can accept it. After completing the mission, you can exchange it for contribution points to exchange for the resources you need. So this was a trade center. Zhu Yao was enlightened. She then saw people walking in and bowing towards Li Lin. Some called him Senior Marshal Uncle, while others called him Senior Marshal Granduncle. After calling out to her, he would curiously size up Zhu Yao at the side, yet he did not question her. Fortunately, Li Lin did not explain her identity to these people. Otherwise, it would be really incomprehensible to see a bunch of people of all ages calling her ancestor. However, Li Lin's status seemed to be quite high. He just didn't know which perfected being he was under. It would be best if he wasn't from Elixir Peak. Being blacklisted, he couldn't have fun with people from Elixir Peak. Marshal Uncle Li. Just as she was thinking, a person suddenly rushed in. He walked a little anxiously, as though he had rushed all the way here. Glancing at Zhu Yao, he leaned over and whispered a few words into Li Lin's ears. Li Lin, who was still calm earlier, had a solemn expression. Grand Marshal Uncle, something happened in Sword Mountain, do you think? Go ahead, I will wait here. Zhu Yao waved her hands. Li Lin hesitated for a moment, before instructing the disciples in the hall to have the manager bring me back later. Only then did he lead the youth who just came in out. Zhu Yao waited for about half an hour, yet she did not see the manager come out. It seemed like the identity jade tablet required a long time. Just as she was planning to walk around, the moment she stepped out of the door, a large group of familiar turnips walked towards her. Especially the round-faced little wimp, who was walking at the very front with his little head lowered. Wasn't he Dr. Wang's son? It's you. Little Wang Shuji saw Zhu Yao at the front as well. His eyes instantly shone, as he charged over like a cannonball. Zhu Yao opened her arms, intending to receive him. However, at the most crucial moment, the little turnip suddenly came to a halt. Staring at her with a burning gaze, his little lips flattened, and he began to reprimand aggressively. Where did you run off to? I have been looking for you for a long time. I'm telling you, if you were lost, I won't be looking for you. Humph. Why did this child speak so incoherently? One moment, he said he had been looking for me for a long time. And the next, he said he wouldn't be looking for me. Zhu Yao awkwardly retracted her empty hands and casually stroked little Wang Shuji's head. It seemed like this little wimp was still rather worried about me. Looking at his little face, which was about to turn into a steamed bun, and his eyes which looked as though they were about to tear up in the next second, Zhu Yao's heart instantly softened. Squatting down, she rubbed his little face. Why are you crying? Aren't I back now? Why are you so worried about me? Wang Shuji was startled. In an instant, like a lit firecracker, he angrily said, Who's worried about you? If not for the fact that you're going to marry me in the future, I wouldn't even care about you. My father said before. For you to suddenly leave like that, it's called not following the ways of a woman. Zhu Yao's hand paused, and then she casually pinched his cheeks. Not following the ways of a woman, your sister. As expected of a spoiled brat, he would tear the roof tiles if he was not beaten. It hurts, it hurts, it hurts. Little Wimp desperately tried to pull her hands down, but unfortunately, he did not succeed. After Zhu Yao had her fill of pinching his cheeks, she then released his painfully red cheeks. Pointing to the little radishes who were currently lining up in front of the counter, she asked, Why are you guys here? Little Wang held onto his own cheeks with both of his hands and rubbed them. With a wronged expression, he replied, Senior Marshal Brother Qin brought us here to collect our identity jade tablets. He pointed to a youth who was currently directing the little children to line up. So they were here to collect their identity cards as well. Zhu Yao was just about to ask them what they had been doing for the past 2 days. Just when Zhu Yao was about to ask them what they had been doing for the past 2 days, a commotion suddenly sounded among the little radishes. A familiar-looking little radish was being pushed onto the ground, while another child with a slightly plump figure was currently riding on the little radish's body, waving his fists. Yet the other children were anxiously watching at the side. Not a single one of them stepped forward to stop them. Even the youth who was leading the group earlier had turned his face away as well, as though it was none of his business. "What are you guys doing?" Before Zhu Yao could even understand the situation, little Wang, who was next to her, had already shouted out to stop them, successfully stopping the little fatty who was beating him up. Little Wang angrily walked over, pointed to the little fatty, and asked, "Little fatty Zhao, why are you beating him up?" The little fatty had an unconvinced look, yet he still came down from the child who was beaten up. Pointing to the child who was already covered in dust, he said, "This brat dared to cut this old man's line. This old man is going to teach him a lesson." Chapter 11. Little Fatty was exposed on the spot, but he became even more pleased. "I'm already at the first level of chi refinement. You guys don't have any cultivation at all. I should have been the first." The truth was clear now. So it was a murder case caused by queuing up. Just as Zhu Yao was about to step forward, her sleeves tightened, as she was pulled by a white-clothed disciple at the side. He was precisely the disciple who brought the little radish head to receive his jade tablet. Little Wang seemed to have called him Senior Marshal Brother Qin. "Junior sister, it's best not to interfere in this matter." Disciple Qin shot her a look and pointed to the little fatty, whispering, "He's the son of the eldest disciple of Weapon Peak. He has a water and wood dual spirit root, and is destined to enter the inner sect lest he gets into trouble." So it was because of his connections. No wonder no one cared about him. However, was it really okay to not teach such a young child a lesson after beating someone up? During this moment of hesitation, little Wang had already settled the matter. They lined up according to the order of height, with the shortest standing at the front. It could be seen that little Wang still had some prestige among this group of children, as the little radishes faintly seemed to regard him as their leader. In the end, little fatty was ranked second from the bottom. Wang Shiji was the highest and ranked last. Even though little fatty was a little indignant, he did not express it directly. Hey, wife, stand here." After Wang Shiji was done, he pointed behind him and waved at Zhu Yao. Success made the corner of her mouth twitch. Looking at the astonished gazes directed at her from all around, she instantly had the urge to crush him to death. Little Wang saw that she was not moving, and thought that she was not satisfied with the last position. Gritting his teeth, he endured the pain, and took a step back. He pointed to the position in front of him. "At most, I'll let you stand in front of me." Zhu Yao's expression darkened even further. However, looking at his serious expression, she had no choice but to walk over. Carrying little Wang up, she forcefully pinched his buttocks a few times. Little Wang was in so much pain that he took a deep breath, yet miraculously, he did not shout out. He looked at Zhu Yao with a strange expression, and then, he silently turned his head away. Hey, why are you blushing at such a young age?" Zhu Yao, who did not understand the mind of a spoiled brat, decided to ignore him. However, she suddenly felt someone bump into her. Looking ahead, he saw the little fatty standing in front of him. Coincidentally, the kid he had beaten up was right in front of him. While no one was paying attention, the little fatty squeezed his butt and successfully squeezed to the third place from the bottom. He even turned around and made a face at the kids behind him. That child called Xiao Yi lost his balance and almost fell down again. He steadied himself and looked at the little fatty in front of him with a face full of hatred. He clenched his fists at the side of his body and muttered something. His voice was very soft, and the others did not hear it. However, Zhu Yao, who was standing behind him, heard it clearly. "One day, I will make everyone in this world crawl under my feet." Zhu Yao instantly gave birth to a familiar yet strange feeling. She was unable to put her finger on what was wrong, and simply felt that it was very illogical. After taking a closer look at the child before him, Zhang Xian finally recognized him. Wasn't this the little beggar with the duo spirit root he had met back in town? Even Li Lin thought highly of his calmness, which was different from that of ordinary children. Who knew which master he would be apprenticed to in the future? But why did she feel strange when she saw him? What was wrong? Zhu Yao began to ponder deeply, but no matter how she thought about it, she could not think of a reason, until the manager came out and interrupted her thoughts, as he respectfully passed a jade tablet into her hands. She simply explained to little Wang that she was not in the same sect as him, and that she would visit him often in the future. Under the other parties, "You're going to break your womanly ways again, gaze." She followed the manager back to Jade Forest Mountain. The life of a practitioner was dry and dull. Ever since her master had taught her how to take in spiritual energy into her body that morning, he had never appeared again. She wondered where he had gone to. Zhu Yao sensed the spiritual energy in the house for an entire day, and finally, she could not sit any longer. If she were to continue sitting like this, forget about spiritual energy, she was about to starve to death. Zhu Yao searched the entire house. Yet, she did not see a single thing that could be eaten. She had even searched her master's house as well. Forget about food. Even he was nowhere to be seen. She was about to starve to death. Master couldn't have forgotten that she needed to eat, right? Glancing at the forest at the foot of the mountain, which was filled with birdsong and fragrant flowers, she began to consider if she should rely on herself. However, someone like her who would even forget to fill up the water when cooking with a rice cooker, even if she were to go hunting, she wouldn't know how to cook, let alone the fact that she did not have the skills to do so. "Master, hurry and come back. Your disciple is about to starve to death." Hence, 3 days later, when a certain master came out from his cave residence for closed-door training, he once again obtained a corpse in front of his house. Yu Yin frowned. Could it be that this disciple of his had some sort of weird habit, to the point where she liked to lie on the ground for no reason? He silently cast a dirt removal art on his disciple, and then transferred some spiritual energy into her. Only then did the corpse on the ground slowly recover. When she looked at Yu Yin again, Zhu Yao could no longer hold back her tears, as she hugged onto the thigh of the person in front of her. "Master!" Yu Yin stiffened for a moment. He was really not used to being hugged like this, however. When he recalled that the person on his thigh was his disciple whom he had waited for so long, he endured the urge to throw her out. It seemed like his little disciple was still rather attached to him. She had only left for a few days, and she was already moved to this extent. "Heavy fog. You're finally back. I'm about to starve to death." Zhu Yao had already begun to complain with tears and snot flowing down her face. If not for the last bit of bottom line in her heart, she would have been unable to help herself from gnawing on tree bark. As someone who had never starved in her entire life, she was really not used to it. "I want to eat." Yu Yin rejected her reflexively. Deity practitioners should not eat too much. There are too many impurities in the mortal realm's food, and it will easily affect your cultivation. "But master, if I don't eat now, I'm going to starve to death." If she was already dead, what was the point of cultivating as a deity? Yu Yin was startled for a moment, and only then did he recall that his own disciple had yet to even learn how to take in spiritual energy into her body. It seemed like she couldn't not eat. Yu Yin was silent for a moment, looking at his disciple who was still hugging onto his thigh and crying. His face was filled with melancholy. "How can my disciple be so weak?" Letting out a long sigh, his figure disappeared in a flash. Only Zhu Yao was left sitting on the grass, as the cold wind blew past her. So hungry. Just when she thought that her master no longer wanted to care about her, her vision blurred, and her master who had left earlier had already returned with a large bag. With a shake of his hand, a large bag of vegetables, carrots, and other vegetables appeared. So he went to look for food for her. But how was she supposed to eat them raw? Just as she was feeling puzzled, her master picked up a carrot and a few stalks of vegetables. Pushing open the kitchen door, he began to roll up his sleeves and cook. Chapter 12. 15 minutes later, 4 dishes and a soup were arranged neatly on the stone table in front of the thatched cottage. A fragrant aroma filled the air. Zhu Yao, however, maintained the state where her jaw had dropped the entire time, and had yet to pick it up, as she looked at a certain person in front of her, who looked like a banished deity. "Eat." Yu Yan lightly said a single word, and then sat in front of her. Passing her a bowl of white rice, he signaled her to start eating. Zhu Yao mechanically received it, and allowed the exclamation marks in her heart to crazily flood her screen. "Master, you can cook?" Yu Yan passed the chopsticks to her, paused for a moment, and then said, "Your grandmaster once taught me." "Oh, so it's the legacy of the sect." Silently he began to eat. After eating 3 bowls of rice, he was finally full and put down his bowl and chopsticks. She was so full that she felt alive again. Throughout the entire process, Yu Yan simply sat in front of her and watched her eat. When she put down her chopsticks, he began to clean up the bowls and chopsticks on the table. Before Zhu Yao could stop him, he had already returned to the kitchen to wash them. At the same time, he also took the other vegetables that were piled in front of the door back to the kitchen. Zhu Yao's eyes shone as she watched, and she was just a step away from rushing up and writing the word virtuous on her master's forehead. Her master was so versatile. Yu Yan looked at Zhu Yao's expression and knew that she had yet to take in spiritual energy into her body. However, he did not urge her either, and simply gave her a few reminders, such as telling her not to be in a hurry to cultivate. The more Zhu Yao heard, the more moved she became. She felt that she had really gotten lucky to actually meet such an all-round master. With regards to cultivation, he was filled with even more fighting spirit. Brimming with confidence, he returned to his room to sense the spiritual energy. Unfortunately, dreams were plentiful, but reality was cruel. Zhu Yao sat for an entire night. Although she did not fall asleep this time, she did not sense the slightest bit of spiritual energy. Looking at the sun that had already risen outside, Zhu Yao felt a deep sense of helplessness. The last time she went out, she already knew that the little radishes who went up the mountain with her had already sensed spiritual energy. That was why they went to receive their identity jade tablets, because the things inside the jade tablets could only be taken out by injecting spiritual energy. As for that little fatty, he had even cultivated to the first level of qi refinement. As for little Wang, he was at the second level of qi disciple. This was also the reason why the little radishes followed his lead. She didn't even have the ability to open the identity jade token. How embarrassing! What happened to the lightning spirit root cheat? Zhu Yao sighed deeply. She felt that she had to look for her master next door to talk about life, in order to comfort her broken heart. As soon as he got up, a familiar warmth surged from his lower body. It was as if 10,000 horses were galloping. Their momentum was ferocious and endless. Zhu Yao's expression paled, and she wanted to cry but no tears came out. Before she could even greet her great-aunt, who she had not seen for a long time, her mind was snatched away by the excruciating pain coming from her lower abdomen. Damn it, why does it hurt so much? She always had a bad habit of menstrual pain, the kind that was very serious. Every time a few days before her period came, she would be very careful not to touch cold water, so that she could get through it smoothly. As long as it felt cold, she would have to go to the hospital for a painkiller injection. However, in the few months since she transmigrated to this world, her aunt had mysteriously disappeared. She had even secretly rejoiced that perhaps there was no such ferocious creature as her aunt in this world. Who knew that it was just a delay caused by the lack of acclimatization? Her aunt, who had been saving for months, was waiting for her here, adding that she had been exposed to the cold wind for an entire night while climbing the mountain 2 days ago. This time's menstrual pain seemed like it would not stop until one of them died. In just a moment, Zhu Yao rolled into a ball from the pain, yet she was still unable to reduce the pain. The bed was also stained with blood-red spots by her aunt. Just when she felt that she was about to die from the pain, the door opened with a walla sound. A white figure appeared in front of the bed. On his ice-cold face, his brows deeply furrowed, as he looked a little strangely at that rolling figure. Yu Yan was really shocked by that instant of blood. "You're injured. Who is it? Who dared to hurt his disciple right under his eyes?" "Master." Zhu Yao silently pulled the blanket over and covered her legs. Having her great-aunt seen, There was simply nothing more embarrassing than that. You know? Who hurt you? Yu Yan reached out his hand to hold onto her wrist and checked her pulse. Her blood and qi were depleted. It seemed like her injuries were very serious. No, it's not. Zhu Yao awkwardly retracted her hand. He could not possibly not see that she was merely having her period, right? Master, go out first. I will be fine in a moment. Oh right, if it's convenient. Can you help me cook a bowl of brown sugar water? Brown sugar water? What's that? Yu Yan was confused. Looking at her hesitant expression, he could not help but guess. Could it be that she had a reason that she could not speak of? Or did the person who hurt her threaten her? A certain master was furious. There was actually someone in this world who could threaten his disciple. Don't be afraid. Tell master what's going on. I will naturally seek justice for you. How was she going to explain her great aunt to him, hey? Master, I'm really fine? Yu Yan's brows furrowed even deeper. Seeing that she was determined not to speak, he had no choice but to settle for the next best thing. Let master take a look at your wound. It can't be, right? Where did her wound come from? However, Yu Yan had already lifted the blanket himself and looked towards her leg. Because of that action earlier, Zhu Yao's menstrual blood surged even more violently. In the next moment, it had already flowed down along her thighs and even stained the bottom of her pants. In Yu Yan's eyes, however, her injuries had worsened because the smell of blood was even thicker than before. He reached out his hand, wanting to take off his disciple's pants and check on her wound. Only then did Zhu Yao suddenly react. Pressing down on his hand, her face had already turned pale. Master, I'm really fine. This is normal. However, Yu Yan still looked at her with a stern look. His eyes were filled with reproach as he pulled down her hand. How is it normal to be injured to this extent? Let go, let master take a look. No. Zhu Yao was so frightened that she had even forgotten about her pain. Leaping up, she hid at the corner of the bed. Growing up to this age, this was the first time her pants were pulled down by someone so righteously. How could she possibly remain calm? Yu Yan's face instantly darkened. His face, which did not have much warmth in the first place, was now overflowing with even more coldness. Come here. Zhu Yao frantically shook her head. If she were to pass, her chastity and integrity would be gone, all right? Yu Yan waved his hand, and Zhu Yao simply felt her body stiffening. As though she had lost control of her body, she flew towards the opposite side and coincidentally landed into Yu Yan's embrace. He took the opportunity to pull, and Zhu Yao's pants were pulled down, revealing half of her white, which was dyed red with blood. Zhu Yao simply felt her lower body turning cold, and in an instant, various emotions such as shame, embarrassment, shock, and humiliation erupted. She could not help but let out a scream that resounded through the clouds, and her right hand reflexively slapped towards the person next to her. Chapter 13. Sovereign Yu Yan, who was known as the #1 in the cultivation world, had not been injured for several tens of thousands of years. It should be said, it had already been several tens of thousands of years since someone dared to make a move on him. Those who dared to make a move against him were either dead or had ascended. Of all things, he was beaten up yesterday morning, and the person who dared to make a move against him was the precious disciple he had waited 10,000 years for. A solid slap landed on his left cheek. His face was fine, but his disciple's hand was swollen. Yu Yan was puzzled. He merely wanted to take a look at his stupid disciple's injuries. Why did she have such a huge reaction? Not only did he refuse to show it to him, he even fought with him. He had to admit that he was a little frightened by his disciple's shrill scream. He could only settle for the next best thing and leave behind some medicine to stop the bleeding. He had to think carefully about what had happened to his disciple. Although he had always known that his disciple was not very smart, this was the first time he had such an intense reaction. And that word of, could it be referring to him? Ever since he was young, he grew up in the Jade Forest Mountain, and the number of people he came into contact with was very limited. Yet when he was young, he would often travel around the outside world. However, since it had been a long time, most of the time, he would stay in the Jade Forest Mountain to wait for disciples with lightning spirit veins. Therefore, he knew very little about the mundane affairs of the outside world. What does mean? Master had never taught him that. In order to protect his own master's prestige, and to find out the reason behind his disciples' abnormal behavior, Sovereign Yu Yan, who had secluded himself for tens of thousands of years, decided to make a trip to the human realm. After spending a whole day flying all over the world, he conducted field investigations in the spirit of learning. Of course, he used the art of invisibility. Only then did he realize that his disciple was not injured, but a normal phenomenon for women, commonly known as water, in the mortal world. Yu Yan heaved a sigh of relief, and finally he could relax. It was good that he was not injured. But a new problem arose. Why didn't his disciple let him see it? Since it was a normal phenomenon, why did it have to be hidden? Was he afraid of being punished? But he had never reprimanded her. No matter what, Yu Yan could not understand his little disciple's thoughts. In the end, he could only conclude that his disciple was really stupid. After understanding a few things to take note of, Yu Yan left the mortal realm and hurriedly rushed back. Just as he walked into the room, he smelled the thick and suffocating stench of blood. Yu Yan frowned even deeper. He casually cast a wind-type mystic art, and only then did the stench of blood lighten a little. His stupid disciple had already fainted from the pain on the blood-stained bed. Yu Yan walked closer and used the dirt removal art to remove the bloodstains on her body and on the bed. Supporting the person on the bed, he took out a bottle of blood-nourishing pellets and fed them to her. Seeing that her furrowed brows finally relaxed a little, he finally felt relieved. He helped her lie down and covered her with the quilt. After taking a look, he took out 1,000-year-old ice silk from his storage ring and turned it into a blanket to cover his disciple. After making sure that she wouldn't catch a cold, he waved his hand and lit the oil lamp. Then he silently took out another bundle of glowing white cloth and a pair of scissors. When Zhu Yao woke up, for a moment, she thought that the days she spent in the cultivation world were just a dream, because she seemed to have returned home. In front of her seemed to be her family's wooden square table that had been used for many years. Below the table were 4 wooden stools, and her diligent mother was currently sewing and mending on the stools. Wait a minute, when did her mother turn into a man? And she was even wearing a strange white robe. Master. She finally recognized the person in front of her, who was currently threading the needle. For a moment, she could not control herself, and her chin was once again in danger of dropping. The hands of the person in front of her paused, and he calmly looked at her. "You're awake." Then his fingers moved, and he nimbly tied a knot, biting off the end of the thread. His movements were clean and efficient, and he was even more skilled than her mother. "Master, you. Heavens, what did she just see?" Her master actually knew how to do needlework. "Master, please tell me, just what other skills have you not learned yet?" Yu Yan did not seem to have noticed her astonishment, as he calmly kept the needle and thread into his storage ring. He tidied up the dozens of rectangular strips of cloth on the table, and then walked over. Reaching out his hand, he felt Zhu Yao's pulse and asked, "Is your body feeling better?" Yes. Zhu Yao was still in a state of shock. Only after his reminder did she realize that her aunt, which caused her to faint from the pain, had already eased by a lot, though it was still surging violently. She unknowingly backed away a little. This time, Yu Yan did not mind her actions, as he passed all the needlework products in his hands to her. Zhu Yao curiously received it. The cloth strips were soft and slippery, and they felt really good to the touch. Furthermore, they were unbelievably light, and with a single glance, she could tell that they were not ordinary goods. Furthermore, the workmanship was extremely meticulous as well. Clearly, there were stitches all around, yet she could not find any gaps between the ends of the threads at all. It could be seen that the workmanship was exquisite. "What kind of cloth is this?" It looked really expensive. "The gauze of the southern seas sharkmen," Yu Yan said without a care. "Your master currently only has this kind of cloth on hand. You can use it for now. If you don't like it, I will help you find some better ones tomorrow." "For me? What's it for?" Zhu Yao pulled the cloth strip. "It's so small. Is it used as a handkerchief?" Yu Yan once again gave her a "why is my disciple so stupid" expression, and then said, "Menstruation belt." Zhu Yao's hands trembled, and she had almost fallen off the bed. Menstruation belt. Menstruation belt. He sewed and patched on the bench for half a day, just to make menstruation belt for her. Yu Yan completely did not notice his disciple, who was already close to being petrified, as he continued to patiently explain. "Don't worry, I have done my research. A woman's menstruation period is at most 5 to 6 days. These should be enough for you to last through this month. If it's not enough, I will just make more for you. A woman's body will be fatigued and weak during this period of time. There's no rush in cultivating. If there's any inconvenience, you can tell your master directly. I will not blame you. As for the brown sugar water you mentioned, I will boil it for you tomorrow. Have a good rest today. Your master will come and see you tomorrow." After saying that, he nimbly stood up and left. A certain person, whose hands were stuffed full of menstruation belts, was still in a petrified state. She did not regain her senses for a long time, and her heart was already in a mess. Is master really all right? My master's brain isn't normal. What should I do? Urgent request, waiting online. Yen had never been a master before. This was his first time. His own master had already ascended when he formed his Azoth core. Too much time had passed, and the details of how he interacted with his master and disciple had long become blurry. Hence, he had completely no experience in how to bring up disciples. He was a pure newbie, and adding that his disciple was still a little stupid, this made him even more worried. Hence, he decided to learn from his Grand Marshal nephew, who had plenty of experience in bringing up disciples. Hence, the sect master of Ancient Hill Sect, Reverend Zidan, after handling a day of heavy sect affairs, just when he was about to take a nap, he was startled awake by Sovereign Yu Yan, who suddenly appeared in his room. The number of times this person had left Jade Forest Mountain in the past 10,000 years could be counted with 10 fingers, was actually personally visiting his room. Could it be that he wanted to give him a few pointers? Reverend Zidan was excited. Just as he was about to express his reverence towards this Grand Marshal uncle of his Grand Marshal uncle threw him a strange question. How to boil the brown sugar water. Chapter 14. What Grand Marshal uncle is talking about? Is it a mystic art? Food. Food? Could it be an unknown heavenly treasure? No. Yu Yan frowned. Could it be that he had never heard of it before? Usually it's for people who lack vital energy. The corner of Zimo's lips twitched. Could it be that Grand Marshal uncle is talking about the water made from brown sugar after it melts? Yu Yan pondered for a moment and nodded. So it only had to be melted. Do you have brown sugar here? I don't. Zimo coughed a few times before regaining his senses. Just why was Grand Marshal uncle looking for this in the middle of the night? However, if Grand Marshal uncle has an urgent need for it, this disciple can order it to be delivered to Grand Marshal uncle tomorrow. Amen. Yu Yan's face still carried a cold expression. He slightly nodded, agreeing to the other party's suggestion, and satisfyingly turned and left. Just as he took a few steps, he recalled something, and once again turned back. With a serious look he asked, "Tell me, other than drinking brown sugar water during a woman's period, what else should I pay attention to?" Zimo's legs tripped, and he almost fell. He didn't hear wrongly, right? Woman's period? Grand Marshal uncle, you're asking about this? You don't know either? Yu Yan slightly narrowed his eyes, and indifferently glanced at him. His expression did not change, but his expression clearly said, "To think that you even took in so many disciples." Zimo simply felt cold sweat dripping down his forehead. He had no choice but to harden his scalp and reply. This disciple did not study it in depth, but I heard that during that period of time, women must not be overly tired, and they must not stick anything cold. Yu Yan nodded and silently noted it down. After pondering for a moment, he continued to ask with a serious tone. Then, what kind of material should be used for a menstrual band? When his disciple received the menstrual band made of muslin, her expression was strange, Most likely, she was not satisfied with the material. Had Grand Marshal Uncle's body been taken over by someone today? Why did he have to ask a man like him about the private matters between women? This disciple feels that most probably, it needs a fabric that's good at absorbing water, like fresh muslin. Fresh muslin. Yu Yan was startled. That seemed to be woven from the silk spat out by a low-ranked spiritual silkworm, and he really did not have it. Hence, he turned his head and silently stared at ZMO, who had been wiping off his cold sweat the entire time. ZMO trembled from her stare. Left with no choice, he took out his storage pouch and silently pulled out a pile of white cloths. This disciple does have a few more bolts here. If Senior Marshal Granduncle doesn't mind, you can choose any of them. Yu Yan nodded. Without waiting for him to finish, with a wave of his hand, Yu Yan kept all of the fabrics into his own storage ring. ZMO, who was still holding on to the storage pouch, that he didn't say that he would give them all. Marshal Granduncle was too generous. He rubbed his hands in distress, but in the end, he was too embarrassed to ask for it back. Marshal Granduncle, why are you asking about these things? If someone were to say that this person, who had cultivated for tens of thousands of years, had suddenly become interested in the affairs of women, no one would believe it. The disciple replied indifferently, "My disciple is having her period. I'll take care of her." Oh, so it's my new Marshal Uncle. No. Could something like this be taken care of as well? Marshal Granduncle, little Marshal Uncle, is a woman. Yu Yan coldly swept a glance at him. Isn't this obvious? Zemo's heart squeezed, as he hesitated on how to let his Marshal Granduncle understand the fact that men and women were different. This disciple is saying, "You're so concerned about little Marshal Uncle. Is she all right?" Yu Yan frowned and replied, "She fainted. She's just suffering from a loss of vital energy and blood. She's fine." He had already fed her medicine and cast a mystic art to reduce her pain. He was still confident in his own mystic arts. He wasn't talking about this. "Senior Marshal Uncle, do you know that menstruation? Ahem. What does it mean to a woman?" Yu Yan brushed his sleeves indifferently. Since he had obtained the item, it was time for him to return. ZMO continued. In the mortal realm, women are usually 11 or 12 years old. Before they reach the age of 15, they will have. Ahem. This means that when a woman reaches adulthood, she can marry. Rest early. Before he could even finish, Yu Yan, who could no longer wait to return, flashed and disappeared without a trace, just like how he came. ZMO, who was talking about the main point, stroking his own storage pouch, his heart ached even more. Senior Marshal Uncle came over in the middle of the night, just to scam his fresh yusha? Although the fresh yusha was not an especially precious cloth, it was not something a regular person could afford to wear. Furthermore, due to its strong water absorption and defensive capabilities, there were often people who used it to refine it into water-type weapons. Using a cloth like this to make menstrual bands, that was a little too ridiculous. More importantly, Senior Marshal Uncle had taken away all of his stock, and did not even leave a small piece for him. ZMO sighed in pain. After all, he was his Senior Marshal Uncle, so he had no choice but to accept it. Just as he was feeling down, he saw a piece of white cloth that was currently flashing with a gentle light at the head of the bed, as though moonlight was pouring down on it. It should have been left behind by Senior Marshal Uncle. ZMO picked it up to take a look, and he was so shocked that even his hands began to tremble a little. This was mystic gauze. The mystic gauze that the sharkmen of the Southern Sea wore. This was a rare treasure in the world, and it could be refined into a defensive-type high-ranked spiritual treasure. Its preciousness corresponded with the ferocity of the sharkmen. Sharkmen were born as 8th-ranked demonic beasts, which was equivalent to a nascent soul practitioner. Furthermore, they usually appeared in groups, and normal people did not dare to provoke them. The sharkmen would only weave a single piece of yarn in their entire lives, and they viewed it as their own lives. In other words, if one wanted to obtain a piece of yarn, one must be prepared to fight to the death with the sharkmen. And right now he had such a piece in his hands. ZMO beamed as he caressed this piece of mystic gauze. Earlier, The heartache he felt from losing the fresh Wuxia was instantly replaced by a huge sense of satisfaction. He wished that he could give senior martial uncle another few hundred pieces. However, when he thought of what he was going to do with that cloth, his emotions began to change. Wait a minute, senior martial uncle used the mystic gauze to exchange with me because he did not have any fresh Wuxia. In other words, he only had the mystic gauze with him. Then the material used to make the menstrual band was... Zmo instantly felt unwell. This Zmo sank into a deep dilemma. On the other side, Yuyan had already returned to Jade Forest Mountain and was preparing to sew the menstrual band at night. He glanced at his disciple's direction. The room was pitch black, and it seemed like he had already fallen asleep. After hesitating for a moment, he turned around and worriedly pushed open the door. This disciple of his was simply too weak, and the key point was that her brain was not too bright either. She was in so much pain during the day, yet she was still unwilling to explain the reason to him. Not only was she weak, she was also stupid. If he did not keep a closer eye on her, he was really worried that one day, she would die from her own stupidity. Inside the room, Zhu Yao had already fallen asleep. Yuyan reached out his hand to check her pulse. Her pulse was much steadier and stronger than it was during the day, and it seemed like it would no longer hurt in the future. He heaved a sigh of relief, and once again glanced at his silly disciple, who was curled up into a ball under the blanket. Suddenly, he recalled Zimo's words. He said that women should not catch a cold during special periods. After pondering for a moment, he silently pulled out another blanket and covered it over her. Mortals would catch a cold more easily, right? After looking at it again, he still felt that it was inappropriate. Not knowing if one blanket was enough, he silently pulled out another blanket and covered it over her. After looking at it again, he still felt that it was inappropriate. He Yuyan was not a petty person either, hence he pulled out a third blanket. After looking at it again, he pulled out a fourth. Chapter 15. Looking at the 10 blankets that were piled on top of her, pressing her to the point where she could not even move, Zhu Yao felt unwell. Yet her master, who had been standing at the side since an unknown time, was calmly raising the 11th blanket, as though he was about to press it down on her body. Master! Zhu Yao was a little sad. Was this the newest method her master invented to wake her up? She had to say he won. Amen. Yuyan lightly responded, and without leaving a trace, he kept the 11th blanket. His expression was calm, as though he was not the one who had guarded his disciple's bed for the entire night. How's your body? As he said that, he had already reached out his hand to check her pulse. Zhu Yao, who was asked about her period early in the morning, instantly blushed. However, seeing his serious expression, she had no choice but to bite the bullet and reply. Much better. As though to prove that she was indeed healthy, she acted as though she was about to get up. After confirming that there was nothing wrong with her pulse, Yuyan finally retracted his hand and instructed her to rest more, and not to be in a hurry to get up. Looking at the bright sky outside, recalling the brown sugar his disciple wanted to drink yesterday, he turned and walked towards the kitchen. Master, wait a minute. Just as he turned around, his disciple pulled onto his sleeves. When he turned back, he saw his stupid disciple's tearless face, and pitifully said, Can you pull me up? I'm being pressed down, I can't get out. Zhu Yao's great-aunt said goodbye to her 5 days later. In these 5 days, she would definitely be in deep water. It was fine if she had a master who often went off the rails and came up with different ways to make paths for her. However, the usually quiet Jade Forest Mountain suddenly became lively. Every day, there would be waves of disciples sending brown sugar up the mountain. The curious look in his eyes before he left made her feel that the entire sect would probably know that her Aunt Flo had come, and that bowl of brown sugar water that would appear on her table on time for her 3 meals a day. She would even feel nauseous when she saw the water. Yet, it was clearly written on the bowl that it was a gift from her master, so she had no choice but to drink it. Hence, the moment her great-aunt left, she clearly, straightforwardly and forcefully expressed that she no longer needed it. Only then did a certain master stop his poisoning behavior. After this incident, Zhu Yao expressed deep worry for her cultivation life in the future. This master of hers, no matter what, could not be faulted from all aspects. He was handsome, had a high cultivation base, and had a powerful identity. Furthermore, he had automatically activated all his life skills. Most importantly, he was really good to his disciple. The only shortcoming was that he lacked common sense. Yes, it was common sense. Just like this time, if it wasn't for his sincerity, she would have thought that there was a hole in his head. How did he manage to survive all these years? It seemed that she would have to remind him indirectly in the future. After all, she was a person who had experienced two worlds. It seemed that it was impossible for her to be a peaceful female cultivator. Who told her to acknowledge a worrisome master? Heaving a deep sigh, Zhu Yao, who had stayed at home for another half a month after the incident with her aunt, decided to head down the mountain to relax. He grabbed a disciple who had passed and asked him to bring him to the main peak. She decided to visit little Wang. No matter what, the two of them were fellow villagers, and he was the one who brought them in. Naturally, she felt a sense of responsibility towards him. In addition, the last time they met, the little guy was obviously worried about her. Although he was young, he already had the responsibility of a little man. It would often make her feel a sense of pride for no reason. After asking around along the way, she found out that the batch of disciples had already passed the entrance training and were distributed to the various peaks. This senior martial brother, I wonder if you have heard where a child named Wang Xuji was distributed to? Zhu Yao continued to ask. Wang Xuji, the eyes of the disciple who was asked instantly shone, and his slightly impatient attitude earlier turned passionate. Are you asking about the sect master's newly accepted chamber disciple, the one with the fire heavenly spirit vein? Zhu Yao nodded. Although she did not know if little Wang had been taken in as a disciple by the sect master, he should be the one with the fire heavenly spirit vein. I wonder who you are. I'm his big sister. Zhu Yao casually made up a reason. In order to prevent others from calling her ancestor, she did not reveal her identity along the way. Unexpectedly, when the disciple heard this, his attitude towards her became even more respectful. Junior martial brother Wang has been taken in by the sect master. He should be at the Sword Mountain right now. If junior martial sister doesn't mind, I can bring you over? Zhu Yao was naturally happy to have someone lead the way, and followed him to the Sword Mountain. When she arrived, she found out that the Sword Mountain was actually not very far away from the Jade Forest Mountain, and it was floating right below the Jade Forest. Furthermore, there were teleportation formations between the various peaks, so flying swords was not a must. That disciple brought Zhu Yao through several teleportation formations, and finally, they arrived at a small courtyard. With a single glance, Zhu Yao saw little Wang, who was currently brandishing a sword that was even longer than her. Zhu Yao bade farewell to the person leading the way, thanked him, and then walked into the courtyard. The moment she stepped in, Wang Xuji noticed her. His little face, which was filled with sweat, flashed with great joy. Keeping his sword, he sprinted over and shouted loudly as he ran. Wife! With a raise of her hand, Zhu Yao knocked on his little head, giving him a chestnut. What are you randomly shouting for? Impudent! I'm not. Little Wang rubbed his aching head with a wronged look and retorted unwillingly. My father said before, a woman's husband is her heaven, so I'm older than you. Why couldn't he let go of this matter? Zhu Yao could not help but pinch his round cheeks. You're not learning good things at such a young age. Why are you always thinking about getting a wife? Who wants to be your wife? Of course it's you. Wang Xuji said with a stern look. A man should be indomitable and do what he says. I said that I will marry you, so I will definitely marry you, and I won't despise you. Also, I'm already 10 years old, I'm no longer a child. Haha, he's pretty stubborn. Did your father teach you these words as well? Wang Xuji shook his head. Master taught me this. Zhu Yao felt it was funny, and stroked his head. Then did your master teach you this before? Deity practitioners must have a clear heart and few desires, and must not be moved by emotions. You're destined to not be able to get a wife for your entire life. Wang Xuji shook his head. He had only thought of this matter after much thought, and his little face scrunched up into a ball. But, Master has a wife as well. Senior Marshal Brother has a wife as well. Senior Marshal Brother Shu Shu has a wife as well. Alright, her version of education was wrong. Cuckoo. I heard that you've taken the sect master as your master. Zhu Yao changed the topic. The moment she mentioned his master, little Wang's face was instantly filled with pride, as he proudly raised his head. I'm a chamber disciple. The author has something to say. Chapter 16. Chamber disciple? Back then, she seemed to have heard that from the person who guided them here. However, she wasn't too clear about these details. Seeing that she did not understand, little Wang explained to her with a serious look. I heard eldest senior martial brother say that only chamber disciples are personally taught divine arts by their master. The rest of the inner sect disciples are taught by senior martial brothers. There's even such details. But it was understandable. There were so many disciples in Ancient Hills sect. Other than the outer sect's odd job disciples, the rest were split into the 6 mountains. The disciples in the mountains were all under the tutelage of the Mountain Lord, and the number of disciples in each mountain ranged from thousands to tens of thousands. If they were all taught by the Mountain Lord alone, wouldn't they be exhausted to death? If that was the case, his status as a chamber disciple was obvious. Not bad, little wimp, you're doing pretty well. As Zhu Yao praised him, she stroked his little head. Little Wang became even more complacent, as he gave her a "I'll protect you in the future" look. His head was held high, like a proud little rooster. As he dodged her hand, he proudly continued to flaunt. Let me tell you, I'm already at the 3rd level of essence. Even eldest senior martial brother isn't as fast as me. Tell me, I'm amazing, right? Yes. You're amazing, the most amazing little fellow. As expected, he was still a child. How could she reject his little eyes that were begging for attention and praise? After all, she was the one who brought him here. She suddenly felt as though she had a child who had just grown up. Wang Shuji, however, felt a little embarrassed from her praises. With a red face, he scratched his head. Then what about you? What level are you at? Zhu Yao was stuffed, and the corner of her lips twitched. She recalled that she had been in Jade Forest Mountain for almost a month. Forget about stepping into essence. She did not even know what spiritual energy was. She could not even sense the spiritual energy her master had mentioned about guiding it into her body. Could it be that she had really aged, and could not even compare to a little turnip? A deep sense of helplessness instantly filled her entire body, and she could not help but let out a long sigh. Wang Shuji sensed her instantly depressed mood, and his sparkling eyes were instantly filled with worry. Pulling onto her hand, he hesitantly spoke up. Don't be sad. Even if you haven't stepped into essence, it's not a big deal. Hao Kai, who came in with us, had just sensed spiritual energy as well. Comparing her to a little wimp, was he really consoling her? Zhu Yao's mood became even worse. Seeing that she wasn't happy at all, Wang Shuji scratched her head in annoyance. She spun around on the spot and continued. Anyway, you'll be very powerful very soon. If you really can't reach chi refinement, at worst, I'll support you. Puff. This was the first time in Zhu Yao's 20-odd years of life that a little radish head was saying that he would support her in such a righteous manner. Though this little wimp had always insisted that she was his wife because of the matter of her spanking his buttocks, she simply treated it as a joke. She was just pretending to be depressed to tease him. She didn't expect him to say that he wanted to support her in such a serious manner. She couldn't help but laugh at that serious little face. Don't laugh. I'm telling the truth. Don't you believe me? Seeing her laugh getting louder and louder, Wang Shuji anxiously stomped her feet. Zhu Yao squatted down, pulled the flustered and exasperated little radish into her embrace, and stroked his little head. This little wimp, he really made people laugh, and moved at the same time. Following his words, she heavily nodded her head. I believe you. Then I will wait for you to grow up and support me. Little friend. Wang heavily snorted, and only then did he calm down, obediently allowing her to hug him. Little junior martial brother. Not far away, a person walked over. He looked to be about 15 or 16 years old, and his face was filled with smiles, looking rather amiable. Seeing the person in the courtyard, a hint of doubt surfaced in his heart. However, his feet did not stop as he walked in. Senior Marshal Brother Du, Wang Xuji fiercely squeezed out from Zhu Yao's embrace and looked at the person with a pleasantly surprised expression. It seemed like this person was one of the sect master's chamber disciples as well. Little Junior Marshal Brother, this Junior Marshal sister is? The person lightly glanced at Zhu Yao. This is my wife. Seeing that little Wang had once again blurted out, Zhu Yao hurriedly covered his mouth with her sharp eyes and nimble hands. This little wimp's big mouth. She did not want the entire sect to have a rumor of her eating cradle grass spreading the next day. Ho ho, I'm his elder sister. Blood sister. So it's my elder sister. The person politely smiled. After sizing her up for a moment, she realized she was unable to see through her cultivation level. In a situation like this, either the other party had yet to learn how to absorb energy into her body, or her cultivation level was much higher than her own. Hence, she was unable to see through her cultivation level. However, looking at her age, it seemed like she had entered the sect a long time ago. It seemed like it was the latter. Thick fog. This humble one is Du Yuanshan, a disciple of Reverend ZMO. I wonder which reverend is this senior marshal sister's disciple? My name is Zhu Yao, and I'm a disciple of Talisman Mountain. In order to prevent others from calling her ancestor, she made up a small lie. Du Yuanshan nodded, and did not pursue the matter any further. Turning his head, he said to Wang Xuji, Little Junior Marshal Brother, it's almost time. Let's head over to Master's place together. Wang Xuji was startled for a moment. Master's place was unavoidable, but it had been a long time since she saw Zhu Yao as well. Feeling a little reluctant, she glanced at Zhu Yao with a troubled expression. Go on, it's about time for me to return as well. Let's head out together. Only then did little Wang feel satisfied, as he followed behind Du Yuanshan. From time to time, he would even sneak a glance at Zhu Yao, as though he was afraid that she would be lost. Occasionally, he would chat idly with her, and Du Yuanshan would interject a few sentences as well. From their conversation, Zhu Yao understood that the number of chamber disciples in every mountain was extremely rare. Only those with especially good aptitudes would be taken in as chamber disciples by the mountain lord. Taking sect master Reverend ZMO for example, currently, there were only 5 disciples. Du Yuanshan was the 4th disciple, and had entered the sect for 15 years. Currently, he was an essence paragon, and little Wang was naturally the youngest junior marshal brother. Looking at Du Yuanshan's expression, it seemed like he really liked this junior marshal brother of his. With him protecting her, Zhu Yao felt a little more at ease. Along the way, she met many Sword Mountain disciples, and they all bowed towards the two of them. It seemed like the status of chamber disciples was extremely high in the sect, while Du Yuanshan and little Wang seemed to have already gotten used to it, as they walked forward without looking sideways. Little Wang, who had the heart of a child, had an extremely arrogant look on his face. He held 120% admiration towards his own master, and along the way, he had been instilling in him the central idea of master is very awesome. Master is number 1 under the heavens. Zhu Yao curled her lips. She could not bear to shatter his passion for chasing after his idol. She just did not know what kind of expression he would have if he knew that even his own master had to call her senior marshal aunt. So it must be your master's fault. That's why you're not as amazing as me. As though he had finally thought of a reasonable reason, little Wang solemnly vowed to her. Why don't you take my master as your master as well? Master dotes on me a lot. He will definitely agree to it. The more little Wang thought about it, the more he felt that what he said made sense. With a grab of his little hand, he was about to pull Zhu Yao towards his master's cave residence. Just as Zhu Yao was about to stop him, a loud sound suddenly resounded. A black figure flashed past, and with a paw sound, it fell in front of them, splattering blood all over the ground. Chapter 17. The person on the ground was no longer breathing. Fresh red blood flowed out from his head, and not even a moment later, it had already flowed all over the ground. It was a ghastly sight. Zhu Yao had lived for 28 years, and this was the first time she had personally witnessed such a bloody scene. Furthermore, the person lying in the pool of blood was actually a child of about 10 years old. Little Fatty Zhao. Little Wang was the first to recognize the person on the ground and exclaimed. Only then did Zhu Yao regain her senses from her shock and immediately covered Wang Xuji's eyes. Little Wimp struggled for a few moments, and then he buried his head into her embrace. He no longer made a sound, as though he was frightened. Zhu Yao was afraid as well. She recalled that the person on the ground was the little fatty she saw when she went to collect her identity tablet. She never expected that in just a month's time, he had fallen in front of her and was no longer breathing. She inadvertently raised her head and saw another child standing 10 steps away. He was also a familiar face, the little beggar Xiao Yi with the duo spirit veins that day. Currently, his eyes were wide open, and he was panting heavily as he looked at little fatty Zhao who was no longer breathing. His white robe was already tattered, and his body was filled with various wounds that were still oozing blood. His eyes were filled with malevolence that had yet to dissipate. The main point was that he was holding onto a long sword, and the sword was still stained with blood that had yet to dry. What did he do just now? He didn't need to say anything. The commotion attracted the attention of many people, and several disciples had already gathered over. How dare you? You actually dare to kill a fellow sect member. Du Yuanshan was the first to react. With a leap, he flew toward Xiao Yi and kicked away the long sword in his hand. Summoning his own flying sword, he restrained him, turned around, and instructed the disciples who were running over. Hurry and inform Master. Xiao Yi did not resist, or perhaps he no longer had the strength to resist, and was easily pressed onto the ground by Du Yuanshan. His pair of clear eyes, however, still flashed with unyielding light. More and more disciples crowded over and began to discuss softly towards the scene. Appearing in such a scene, Zhu Yao was a little flustered as well. She could only tightly cover Wang Xuji's eyes, preventing him from seeing. What's with the commotion? A loud and clear voice resounded, as though it was echoing from the sky. A white figure flew over from the main hall, and it was Ancient Hill Sect Master ZMO. The scene, which was still a little noisy earlier, instantly quieted down. Zemo's gaze swept towards little fatty Zhao on the ground, and his expression turned cold. Squatting down, he inspected for a moment. With a wave of his hand, he cast an art, and in an instant, a screen of light enveloped the bloody man on the ground. His bleeding head immediately stopped, and the wound healed at a speed invisible to the naked eye. When the screen of light dissipated, he fed the other party something. After a while, when the child regained his breathing, he turned around and questioned the people around him. His cultivation base has been destroyed. Who would be so vicious? He recognized this injured child. He was the son of the eldest disciple of Weapon Peak's Reverend Zi Yuan, Yuan Xiao. He had heard that he was rather talented, so why was he injured to this extent? Reporting to Master, Du Yuanshan forcefully pulled the person beside him up. It's this person. When ZMO looked at Du Yuanshan, his gaze landed on the child in his hand, and his eyes instantly turned a little colder. What happened? Du Yuanshan bowed towards ZMO and continued. Little junior marshal brother, junior marshal sister Zhu, and I were passing by this place, and we just happened to see this person heavily injuring junior marshal brother Zhao. ZMO turned around and looked at Zhu Yao, who was currently carrying Wang Xuji. For a moment he was stunned. Little martial aunt, why is she here? Could it be? ZMO reflexively tightened his grip on his storage pouch. He looked around, and only when he did not see that person who was emitting out a cold aura, did he heave a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Ancestral Grand Master did not come. Concealing his thoughts, he coughed, and then instructed a disciple beside him. Go to Weapon Peak and inform Reverend Zi Yuan and Yuan Xiao to make a trip to the Great Hall. He glanced at Du Yuanshan, and then hesitantly glanced at Zhu Yao. You guys, follow me to the Great Hall. After saying that, he carried the child in his arms and flew towards the main mountain on his flying sword. As a witness, Zhu Yao had no choice but to follow Du Yuanshan and the child called Xiao Yi and enter the teleportation formation to the main mountain. Only when they arrived at the entrance of the Great Hall did Zhu Yao remember to loosen her hand that was covering little Wang's eyes. It was rare that little Wang did not throw a tantrum this time. Most probably, he was frightened by the scene earlier. His eyes no longer had that radiant light in the courtyard, and his little hands unconsciously grabbed onto the corner of her clothes. Zhu Yao's heart softened a little when she saw this. That scene earlier, even an adult like her was shocked, let alone a child. Stroking his little head, "Don't be afraid, big sis is here." Wang Shiji was startled for a moment. Raising his head to look at her, he nodded a moment later, and then shook his head. Zhu Yao sighed, pulled his hand, and walked into the Great Hall. Other than ZMO, there were two other people in the Great Hall. One of them was a little older, and his entire body was emitting out an unyielding aura. He should be the Weapon Peak's Mountain Lord Ziyuan. There was another person standing behind him, and he should be Little Fatty Zhao's father, Zhao Yuanxiu. Little Fatty, however, was nowhere to be seen. Most probably, he had already been sent down to recuperate. Du Yuanshan, who had arrived a step earlier than them, had already recounted everything that had happened earlier. As for Xiao Yi, he seemed to have been cast with some sort of mystic art, as he was tied to the side by circles of glowing ropes. Zemo's expression was a little solemn. His brows were deeply furrowed, as though he was considering how to handle this matter. Disregarding the brotherhood of fellow sect members, he is already so ruthless at such a young age. He must be severely punished. Zhao Yuanxiu, who was at the side, could no longer hold it in any longer. His pair of eyes glared fiercely at the child, who was tied up on the ground. "Sect Master Senior Martial Uncle, please uphold justice for my son." ZMO raised his hand, signaling him not to be anxious. Taking a few steps forward, he looked at Xiao Yi, whose body was covered in wounds, and asked, "Tell me, just why did you have to be so heavy-handed?" Little Xiao Yi's face was filled with stubbornness. Bearing his body full of injuries, he simply replied word by word. "He deserves to live." At that moment, Yuan Xiu was so furious that he rushed out. "Now that things have come to this, you still do not repent. What do you care about the sect's rules?" Xiao Yi, however, coldly snorted and retorted, "When has your son ever cared about the sect's rules? He bullied his fellow sect members, and bullied others with his staff. I beat him up for the sake of enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens. I only regret that I beat him up too lightly." Yuan Xiu was so furious that he was about to make a move. However, he was stopped by his own master Ziyuan. Ziyuan simply coldly glanced at the child on the ground, turned around, and said to ZMO's senior martial brother, "The current situation is already clear. The sect has its own rules. I hope that senior martial brother can handle this fairly." "Junior martial brother Ziyuan, how do you think we should handle this matter?" ZMO asked. Ziyuan stroked his own white beard. He looked casual, yet his words were filled with coldness. "According to the sect's rules, cripple his cultivation, remove his spirit vein, and expel him from the sect." When his words fell, even the crowd present were startled. On the ground, Xiao Yi's eyes revealed a hint of despair as well. His pair of small hands were tightly clenched into his palms, and a few traces of blood seeped out. However, he still gritted his teeth, and did not make a sound. Zemo's frown deepened. Crippling his cultivation was fine. However, once his spirit vein was removed, he would never be able to cultivate again. This disciple called Xiao Yi was a good seedling, and it was a little unfortunate for him to be crippled like this. However, he had to give face to his junior martial brother. For a moment, he was in a dilemma. Looking at his surroundings, he looked at the person who was holding on to his little disciple's hand at the entrance. In an instant his eyes shone. He bowed towards the entrance in a proper manner, and spoke with a respectful tone. "I wonder what wise opinion little martial uncle has on this matter." What the hell? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.